Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Mantry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered, and the surprised look of Tom at the top of the show is back.
I can't believe I did
Hooray!
it again. I was like, did it
Hooray!
start? Did it start? I'm not sure if it started. I think it started. Oh, for the love of...
If you don't
I'm
normally
really
watch
good
the
at that.
YouTube, just come and see the first 5 seconds just for that, so you can see the surprised look of Tom. It's shock and awe as
Well,
we start the
okay.
podcast.
The thing was, is that it said going live, and then your sound went absolutely dead. Like you have a little bit of
Yeah, because
going
I'm
on
mute.
right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm mute.
So you went absolutely dead, and I was like, is it going? And then it kind of did. It kind of did nothing, and then I was like, oh, maybe it's not gonna. And my eyebrows went up, and boom, it started. I'm like, dang it, got me again. Google, you got me again. This is AV Rent, the podcast where we answer your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. You can also email Rob directly at rob@avrent or Tom at avrent if you'd like to send something my way. You go to www.avrant.com for our website, find the old episodes all the way up to about, I don't know, 200-300. I don't remember which one we stopped. Which ones got deleted in the old archives, but so at some point they stopped being relevant. And you can go to facebook.com/AVRant podcast, where a lot of people go to ask their questions and to get them answered. Twitter at First Reflect for Rob, at AVRant_Tom for me, and at Austin Pond, our producer, Austin. He has his own podcast called We Watch Movies. We Watch Movies is a podcast all about fertilizer.
Okay.
That's
Natural
right.
fertilizer?
All kinds.
Synthetic fertilizer?
All
All
kinds.
kinds. Oh,
All
okay.
kinds.
All right. I can make a podcast then.
Yeah, that could be a game. Anywho, so we have been talking a lot lately, and we're going to get to our listeners this week in a second, but we've been talking a lot lately about technical issues and all that stuff. So things have been changing here on the AV Rant podcast. Number one, my wife decided she didn't like the temperature of our house and thought that we should get one of those smart thermostat thingies like the Nest.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to get the Nest, mostly because I've been reading things that make me think that Nest is going out of business.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to buy something that was going to be something that was going out of business. So if you don't know how these things work, you cannot directly connect to your thermostat from an IP thing. That's not the way it works. The way it works is your thermostat connects to the internet. It sends data up to a server that's with the company.
Mm-hmm.
Then your phone accesses that data and can make changes. You say, okay, I want to make this change, and then the server says, okay, fine, I'll send that along to your thermostat. Don't worry, it's all good. I got your back.
Okay.
And when I thought that Nest was probably looking like a little shaky, I was like, I don't want to buy something where it's suddenly going to stop working when they go under or Google sells them. Did it Google buy? I don't know. Somebody.
Oh, yeah, Google bought them. Yeah.
So not real. And Google has got no compulsions about like, glasses.
Yeah, they shut down that Revolve hub, so all those folks were out of luck.
Yeah, so I went with the Eco B3.
Yeah.
Which is a nice little and the thing that and I'll talk more about it in the future, but there's a point to me bringing this up. The thing that really, it has its own little sensors that you can put around your house. So I've got one in the home theater, which it's really far away from the main unit, and it's had a hard time connecting, but I just moved it about 3 feet over, and it reconnected, and now it's stayed connected. I won't know for sure until we finish the podcast, because the door will be closed for a long time, and then I'll know for sure whether or not it works. In which case, I put a hole in the wrong place in my wall, and I'll have to fix that. Anywho, it's got sensors that you can put around the house. So where it sits, the Eco B3 in this little hallway, always reads like 10 degrees cooler than any other sensor in the house. Okay. And suddenly we're like, this is why my wife is so uncomfortable at night, because she gets woken up because she's sweating, basically, and not in a good way. So this has been a huge revelation, and that alone was probably worth the price. But now I'm setting up all sorts. Anyway, I'll talk about it more in the future. But the reason that I'm talking about that is because I also bought a new computer, and I told myself I was not going to set up my new computer, wasn't even going to take it out of the box until I got this thermostat set up. So I got the computer was they tried to deliver it on Thursday, but I missed it. So then they delivered it on Friday, and my mom called me and said, "Oh, it was here," and I was like, "Great, great!" And then my wife says, "Hey, I got us a camping spot for this weekend. We're going camping." Like, oh, fantastic! So, fortunately, my son got sick on Saturday, so we ended up having to come back. Which I guess not fortunate for my son. I'm kind of a jerk for saying that, but that meant that Sunday morning I got up and like jumped out of the bed and started working on the thermostat, and then started working on the computer. Now I have the computer. So I connected the computer, got everything transferred over, which on the Mac is really stupidly easy. You like connect an Ethernet cable and you say migrate everything, and it migrated everything. Nice. Even like Word, all these programs I paid for, they all got migrated over. I didn't have to put any keys in or any of that nonsense. It was great. It took about 3 hours, but it was great. So I hooked it up to the internet, and I was like, I wonder what the speed test is. So I did the speed test, and it was 50 down and 10 up. Okay. And that was wirelessly connected to my router.
Yeah.
So then I just hardlined it just now and tested it, and it was 114 up and still about 10 or 11 down. So
vice versa.
Much better. Whatever.
Yes.
It is. Yes.
Much
whatever.
better. Yeah.
Much better. So, yes. Okay. Very happy. So we'll see how this goes. Technology.
So fingers crossed. Now, if there is fuzzy video or breakups, we know it is not the computer's fault. We know it is probably the router at this point.
My wife is sold on getting a router. I told her what you thought, and so if we have to spend $100 on a router, we have to spend $100 on a router.
You had several suggestions come in from various people for routers. So
I did say that they all ended up being about $100. So
yeah, that's good. Okay.
So yes, technology. Yes, and then there's going to be some, like I said, there's going to be some changes to the podcast in the next couple of weeks. Working on that right now, but technology is a big part of it. We got to get the technology right, and then you'll see.
Infrastructure.
That's right. Got laid the baseline. Anyways, we got some listeners of the week. We want to thank this week. There's a couple of ways to become a listener of the week. One of the ways, you can go to www.avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, which was funny. I was talking with a friend today, and he's like, you go to the store, you go to Starbucks, and you buy a $4 cup of coffee, and you can leave the guy like 50 cents or $1. He spent like 3 minutes doing that. But then this same person who will do that will pirate a book that somebody spent 2 years writing. Sure. They'll go out there like $3.99 for a book. What kind of highway robbery is this? You only spent 2 years of your life doing it. Come on. So, anyways, if you'd like to buy us a cup of coffee to help support the podcast, click on the link. Yes. And it'll go take you to a PayPal donation. We had 2 people do that this week. That was Deepon. Is that right?
Deepon.
Deepon and Brandon. So thank you, Deepon.
Thank you, Brandon. They said in unison.
We did.
Might not show that way in the audio, but
who knows?
Did on my screen.
It was on my way. On my side, it was the same too. It was the first time. Anyways, Nelson also supported the podcast in another way. He bought some Marant's SR7010.
Nice.
Which came with a free Panamax surge protector and a bunch of SVS Prime speakers who like accessories for less, and SVS know they bought them because of AV Rant. Nice. So that's great. Thank you, Nelson.
Good gear too. It's
yes.
Gonna be sweet.
He's going to be very happy with that.
Lots of news.
In the news, we're going to go fast because we got a lot of questions.
It's just headlines.
Yeah. The Consumer Technology Association has officially defined a wide color gamut display as any display that can accept and decode BT2020 signals and display that signal with a range of colors that exceed the BT709 color space. However, slightly beyond BT709 that might be. We're this much.
They're like, okay, you can get to 100% of BT709, you can accept and decode a BT2020 signal, and you can go to 101% of BT709. You qualify as wide color gamut display. So, it's not asking that much. It's mostly about the signal decoding. That's about it.
Sony will release firmware update this month to give their $10,000 bunch of letter 4K projector.
The 365, that's what you wanted. There's the VPL VW365.
Yeah, it's too many letters. I don't care. HDR10 support. So
when it came out, it was not HDR compatible, but it did have an HDMI 2.0 at the time port, and it did support HDCP 2.2. Since it is a genuine 4K projector, it actually has a 4K. And when they say 4K, they actually mean 4K. It's 4096. Not the 3840 resolution. So it's 4096 by 2160 panel, SXRD, their name for liquid crystal on silicon. So via firmware, they can update that HDMI port to be HDMI 2.0A. and it still has HDCP 2.2, of course, and now it can accept HDR10 signals. So all three of Sony's current genuine 4K projectors can now do it. This is the least expensive at $10,000, so it gives you an idea of what kind of prices we're looking at.
That seems reasonable. All right, Antoine on Twitter sent us TiVo's announcement of their new TiVo Roamio OTA, over the air is what OTA stands for. 1 terabyte 4-tuner. It's called the OTA.
The 1 terabyte is part of the name.
Oh, okay.
So it's the TiVo Roamio OTA 1 terabyte. That's the full name of the model.
It's got 4 tuners, a terabyte of storage, obviously, and it costs $400 up front, but there's no ongoing TiVo service subscription, so it's a one-time fee. Do we think TiVo is going to continue to be around? Is that a thing that we think?
Well, that's the very next headline.
Oh. Speaking of TiVo, Rovi is buying them for $1.1 billion, and they will name the joint company TiVo.
Yeah. And Rovi, by all accounts, they are known as the ones who provide the program guide currently for like Xbox One, that Xbox One guide, or just through the Rovi system. Everyone's like, they're not very good. So since it's Rovi buying TiVo, the thought is, well, is Rovi going to replace what they've been doing all this time with TiVo's guide, which is much better? Everyone agrees TiVo's guide is much better. So maybe by acquiring them, they'll replace their own. Or maybe they'll be like, well, this is what we do, and now we've just got TiVo hardware to go along with it. So we're going to continue using Rovi service, which everyone is dreading if that's the case, in which case you will not want to pay them.
They spent $1.1 billion.
I don't know, man. They thought it was good enough to put out as a product. So... yeah,
maybe they're tired of getting their butts kicked, so they
could be,
they bought the competition.
Honestly, Rovi is mostly a patent company, and they're mostly interested in getting TiVo's 6,000 patents that they have. And that's not an exaggeration. They literally have like 6,000 patents. Yeah. So that's what this is about.
Canadian. Pioneer is partnering with Dirac, as long as you live in Japan.
Yes.
So maybe they'll come over here sometime at some point.
I mean, everyone's obviously thinking, oh, Dirac, that's room correction. Pioneer makes AV receivers. Maybe they'll put them in there. However, the entire AV receiver arm of Pioneer was purchased by Onkyo.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
This is not part of that deal. This is Pioneer Japan, which is still a large company, and they do a lot of OEM work. And honestly, it sounded from the announcement, the way that it's written, that it's mostly about Dirac looking for a way to have more distribution to a larger group of products, and like Pioneer can help us do that. So it seems like it's more about Dirac using Pioneer's infrastructure to help spread Dirac, as opposed to Pioneer going to Dirac saying, hey, we want to put your software in our products. So,
right.
Anyway, maybe at some point we'll have a mass market consumer with Dirac correction in it. It's certainly not impossible as processor power continues to increase and get cheaper. Maybe. But I wouldn't hold my breath. Not coming this year or next.
Nope. Tyler and Chris. I cannot say Chris's last name. That's so
Heinonen.
many N's. There's like a many N's. Anyways, Chris, who's he? He's
a writer, the freelance writer for many websites.
Oh, okay. Anyways, are flabbergasted by the news that on June 7th, there will be an extended edition of The Martian released on Ultra HD Blu-ray. So 4 months in, and they'll already have 2 versions of this that you can buy.
Yeah, on Ultra HD Blu-ray, we're talking about. New format, 4 months in, double dip.
So the extended version is 10 minutes longer, and I think it's just it's probably Matt Damon going, I'm on Mars!
I think it's just 10 minutes of watching him grow a beard. That's probably what it is.
Just staring at the mirror for 10 minutes. That'd be awesome.
That'd be awesome. It would be good.
10 minutes longer. It comes with a bunch of new special features, but like all Ultra HD Blu-ray releases so far, those special features will only be on the 1080p Blu-ray disc that's packed in. Yeah. So
it's a big lot of whoopee.
And so you're going to spend that. Whatever is it? 40? Oh, how much are those? $30? $40?
Yeah, I mean the retail price is 40, but most of them sell for 30. So yeah, I mean if you haven't already bought The Martian, I guess you can wait for the extended edition at this point. Hooray! But yeah, it is kind of amazing. There's already a double dip. And they're not even sure if the extended edition will include the theatrical version with it. Probably not. I'm betting they won't. I mean,
there's no way they're putting no, there's no way they're doing that.
Well, I don't even know if Ultra HD Blu-ray can do the whole seamless branching thing that Blu-ray could do. I don't know if it can or not.
Oh, I don't know about that, but I would be shocked if they had both versions.
I'd probably not. They're probably gonna if you want both versions, buy it twice. And since this is Fox, who did announce, I believe, one title coming up that will have DTS-X on it, but so far Fox has not put immersive audio on any of their Ultra HD Blu releases, and this one won't have it either. So look for the triple dip coming in the future at some point when they add either DTS-X or Dolby Atmos to it. Yeah.
As expected, Marvel and Netflix are going to give us a Punisher series based on the success of the Punisher and Daredevil season 2. Let's be honest. I did not like that guy as the friend in the first couple of seasons of Walking Dead.
Walking Dead?
Okay. I did not like him. I thought he was a whiny little a whiny little child.
You weren't a fan of Shane.
Was not a fan of the Shane. But he was truly terrifying and Daredevil. You always felt like he's gonna stab somebody. Like any second now, he's about to stab somebody.
And he did stab many people.
He did stab many
and
people.
Shot many people.
Actually felt they could have. I felt like they did. He did a lot of stuff very like Greek mythology type of stuff where it's like it kind of is like you'd walk in and there'd be a bunch of people hanging from hooks. You're like, I bet they thought to themselves, I wonder if we can get away with showing this. We better not. He's supposed to be a good guy. And I'm like, he's not really that much of a good guy. He really is. He's
an anti-hero.
He is the anti-hero.
Yeah.
He is the anti. He's what Batman would be if Batman was like, you know what?
Was from Batman versus Superman, because he was basically the Punisher.
That's right, where he just straight up murders everybody.
He just kills everyone he meets.
I haven't seen the movie yet. I know all the spoilers, and apparently Batman straight up murders like anybody. Like 50 cents for a tip for a cup of coffee, murdering you. Sorry.
They now refer to it as the Snyder Murderverse. that's the DC extended universe. It's the Snyder Murderverse.
All right, are we still in news now? Now we're in comments.
All
right, Efrain.
Yeah.
In what we all thought was never going to happen, Pulse Infinity, his headphone DAC has finally arrived. So Pulse Infinity was like this Kickstarter he funded over 2 years ago.
Yeah, these are the guys who made the Geek Pulse, which is a fairly well-known headphone amplifier and DAC, and they put together this Kickstarter for their new Pulse Infinity model. It was very expensive. The retail price is even more expensive than the Kickstarter, and he waited for 3 years.
Well, let's be honest here. Okay, it sounds like they made him wait, but there were things that he did. They gave him options like, oh, well, if you buy this, then you'll wait a little bit longer, but we'll give you this other thing along with it. And and if you want, and at some point they were ready to ship it, but a lot of people had been having issues with it. So he was like, no, don't ship mine until you're sure that you've got all those things ready. So it isn't 100%.
Well, it took this long for a viable, crappy version to make it to him. So
this was the running joke.
This is how long it took.
Our AV Rent after parties for so long was the running joke that this was never going to happen. Anyways, he says the noise floor is excellent, and his Sennheiser's HD600s have never sounded better. Although he kind of thinks that might have more to do with the extra power than the actual DACs. The HD600s, they are a 300 ohm headphone. Yeah.
So that's one of those cases where it actually might make a difference when you have a headphone amp. So here, I'm showing the picture that he sent to us. It has a separate power supply. I think that's the box on top. It has an external power supply. Because
there it is.
Of course it does.
Where is it? Oh, the box on top. Oh,
I think so, yeah.
Is that XLR cable he's got plugged into it? And it's got that minimalist design and all of that hot mess.
Anyway, he has it. He's happy with it. I don't know if he will keep it or sell it for a profit, because he could sell it for a profit. And given how much money he spent, he could have had that Oppo HA1, which is not an inexpensive headphone amplifier, but this is even more expensive. So
I think I might have skipped somebody.
At least it turned out good.
Bob has heard us talk about doorways that have no doors, such as hallways and stairwells, and the problems they cause with pressurizing a room. He had this problem, but found a creative solution. He took a glass door he wasn't using. Now, first of all, how many of us actually have glass doors that we're not using? But anyways, he took a glass door that he wasn't using, added some oak strips around the edges, and mounted it into a sliding track. It's not totally airtight, but it's a huge difference compared to the open doorway. And it doesn't block the pictures on the wall behind it when the door is.
Yes, so I'm showing the images once again. If you put me up on the YouTube thingy. So that's the door closed, and then there's the door open, slid open, but you can still see the pictures through the glass.
Oh, that's what he's talking about. I see it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's that, and there's closed. Not bad. That's good. And yes, I mean, you know, a door does not have to be absolutely airtight to make a difference. Again, the easiest way is just to visualize water. You know, so yes, there are cracks around the bottom and the edges of the door, and yes, water would still seep out, so air will still seep out, but it's not as though it flows out as easily as if there were no door there at all.
Hey, if it was totally airtight, you couldn't get AC in there. So
that's right.
There you go. Bill on Facebook was looking for an inexpensive, easy way to expand his whole house audio system to his garage while using his iPhone to control various audio zones throughout the house. He picked up a Chromecast audio for $35 at Target and paid $4 for the Pocket Cast app so he could easily cast podcasts from his iPhone. With the Chromecast audio connected to his Wi-Fi network and using its analog output to feed some powered speakers, he's found that the solution works very well. Something like the Forest speakers would have also worked. It was what I probably would have suggested, even though I've had in both of mine are broken. They just straight up stopped working. I have no idea why. Now, they were sent to me for a review, and my thought is, you send me these things for review, I review them, I try to send them back, and you don't take them back, or you say, we're not going to pay for the shipping, just keep them. I'm not going to hit you up when they break. You know, and they I mean, I use them all the time. There's still one that works. The other one just stopped connecting to the Wi-Fi for some reason. But that would have worked just as well, too, because you can set those speakers up for different places all over your house. And then from the Forest app, you say, oh, I want to stream this to this place, this to that one, that sort of stuff. Okay. Yeah, so I would have suggested that as well. Would have worked fine. I don't know about a garage. Depends on where he lives, I guess, the humidity and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, these Chromecast audios, I mean, they're only $35, little disc-looking thingy that, you know, it's pretty simple little device.
The new Chromecasts are those disc things, too, and I don't like them to be discs.
The shape?
They're just not a good shape.
I don't know. They're distinctive. But,
whatever.
Who knows? They're kind of eating Sonos' lunch at this point.
The only thing that should be round is a pancake, as far as I'm concerned. I guess there's probably other things, but right now the only thing I can think of is I'm kind of hungry. Cliff Heyne is installing some RBH Sound SI-660 in-wall speakers, and he gives them a big thumbs up for producing RBH tower-like sound from an in-wall speaker. We've talked about that before. Cliff wrote, or sometimes writes, I don't know what he does anymore, for Audioholics, but he also has I don't know if it's a side or a full business, wherever the hell it is that he lives up north. He's an installer now. So that's why you're seeing these pictures, and they look like, oh, it's a fresh install. That's why.
So I'll go through some of these images if you're watching the YouTube. But he was basically like, these are full-on speaker components that just happen to be inside of an in-wall speaker. And the picture that's on the screen share right now, I'll describe it for the audio listeners. Those are the backer boxes that RBH has for a new install. So this is just framing is up there, not a finished wall. And you put in these boxes that have some stuffing inside them. You run the wires in there, and then you just install the speakers once the drywall is laid over these backer boxes, and you've cut the hole where the speaker goes. So makes for a nice clean install. And he's like, really impressive sound. So just a little thumbs up there for we have been recommending RBH in-wall speakers as a good option for a while now, and he agrees.
That ladder he's got there is heavy as crap. I have a friend that has one of those, and they're awful.
Little giant.
Oh, they're terrible. It's like being punished for having a ladder. You carry that thing around, and you're like, oh my. I'd rather buy 2 ladders of different sizes than have to deal with one of those things. It's the worst. They show those on TV, and they're like, "Oh, even my wife can do it." I'm like, "Your wife is buff, dude," because those things are heavy as crap. I don't know if that's the same one my friend has, but my friend has one that's like that. That's just, it's atrocious. Jonathan, this is from last week. Now, this below quotation from AVS Forum makes sense to Jonathan, but seems at odds with what Rob has said and I have agreed with. What do we have to say in our defense? Don't read AVS Forum. Let's start there. That's my first defense. If you're on AVS
this whole
Forum,
thing is a bit off.
you're going down the wrong path. They accidentally get things right every once in a while. That's the way I'll put it. I'll put it like that. They accidentally get stuff right. There's some good information over there. It's just buried under piles of.
You got to filter through.
Google it and use the search function, and buy my speakers.
Yeah. Well, rather than reading all this as a quote, maybe we can paraphrase. I mean, this is essentially about HDR, and we talked a little bit about how Dolby Vision uses dynamic metadata that can change literally on a frame-by-frame basis if the person who's making the content wants it to, whereas the current version of HDR10 has static metadata, so it sets the display once at the beginning of the program and then goes, have at it. That's the way it's going to be from here on out. And so this person on AVS, and I'm not sure who it was, but anyway, they were questioning whether dynamic metadata is actually of any benefit to edge-lit displays, or that it would be more benefit to edge-lit displays and less of a benefit to full-array local dimming displays, which themselves already increase and decrease the light output of the screen based on the algorithms for the local dimming that's built into the TV set. Now, what they're really talking about are two substantially different things. One of them is intra-scene contrast, meaning the difference in dynamics you can have within an individual scene, which has a lot to do with local dimming, versus the entire light output range of the whole movie, which is what the metadata is dealing with. So they're saying, like, okay, let's say you got a display and it can go up to 800 nits. That's the peak that it can do. And if it's an edge-lit display, even if it's edge-lit with so-called local dimming, you know, there's not going to be a lot of zones. And so the metadata comes down and it says, okay, the brightest that this movie ever gets is 1,000 nits, but you, the TV, you can only do 800 nits. So there has to be some tone mapping that says, okay, I'm going to take what was 1,000 nits, that's the brightest this movie ever gets. I'm going to bring that down to 800, which is the brightest that I can ever get. And I'm going to shift everything down to all fit within the 800 nits that I can produce. And I'm an edge-lit display, so I'm just stuck there. And then he's saying, well, if it's a full array local dimming set, then it could increase or decrease the brightness as necessary. However, if it's a full array local dimming set that still tops out at 800 nits, nothing has really changed. It still has to bring 1,000 nits down to 800 nits. That's the brightest it can get. So they're definitely confusing intra-scene contrast with global contrast for the entire movie. And those are two very different things. So you could have a display, let's say it's an edge-lit display, it doesn't have fantastic black levels, but it can get up to 800 nits. So it says, okay, I'm going to take 1,000 nits, I'm going to bring that down to 800, I'm going to scale everything down, and then you go, well, when I look at this scene, it doesn't look super contrasty because the blacks aren't super black, and the brightest it gets is 800 nits, which is very, very bright, but the blacks aren't very black, so the whole thing doesn't look super contrasty. That's not the fault of the metadata. It's the fault of the display has kind of crappy black levels.
Right.
Whereas the full array local dimming set could look a lot better because maybe it produces much darker blacks at the same time as 800 nits peak. But the metadata had nothing to do with that. The metadata just says, what is the maximum this movie ever gets to? And now display, based on knowing that information, you need to tone map everything. You need to scale everything down to fit so that, let's say it was mastered at 4,000 nits, but the display tops out at 800 nits. It has to now say, okay, 4,000 nits, I have to scale all the way down to 800 because that's the brightest I can ever get. And the brightest thing in this movie should be the brightest thing that the display can do. And then I have to tone map everything that was in a 4,000 nit range to now fit within an 800 nit range. So that's what the metadata is doing. It really has nothing to do with whether display is local dimming or not, because that just tells you the intra-scene contrast. So that's how I defend myself, Jonathan.
And I defend myself by making Rob answer that question because I didn't even pay attention to anything he just said. It seemed like a lot of words to me. Just say that we're right. Just say we're right. We're right. I don't even know what we're right about, to be honest with you.
We have full array local dimming standard dynamic range televisions.
Sure.
Right? And we say that those tend to look better than ones that just have a static backlight. You know, if it just had a CCFL backlight or an edge lit that didn't have any local dimming, or even if it did, probably doesn't look as good as full array local dimming, but it topped out at 100 nits because it was standard dynamic range. So that, you know, the maximum nit level is what the metadata is essentially saying. That has nothing to do with how contrasty the image looks, because that's a function of how good is the display. Right,
absolutely. All right, back to the questions. I was looking to see what the image looked like. I was just concerned whether or not I was blown out. I think I'm a little blown out. It doesn't matter. All right, Tom. not me, different dude, has a 7.2 system. This is the guy. I feel like this is this the guy who's had the article? No, different guy, right?
Different guy had the article, but well, I'm pretty sure that Tom has been featured in some magazine because he had photos.
Yeah, he had
from
really
like
nice
a magazine
photos.
spread. So yeah, this was like largely a do-it-yourself theater. He like built his screen. He's the fellow who used the counter laminate
Right,
to
right.
make his screen, which is pretty cool. And then he's got Sierra 2 speakers, Ascend Acoustics Sierra 2 speakers, all up front, inside like a credenza that he built. And
Right.
yeah,
Anyways, he's got a 7.2 system using Emotiva's XMC-1 processor. They recently posted on their insider blog that they intend to release an upgrade that will add 2 additional DSP processors and repurpose some of the XMC-1's outputs, so they'll be able to offer 5.2.4 or 7.2.2 Atmos. No word yet on pricing or release date. That doesn't sound like Emotiva. Although they have...
Yeah, they're like, hopefully in the summer. I'm like, of which year? Of which year, Emotiva?
I'm
Which
sorry.
summer?
Hey, you know I love Emotiva, but come on. I gotta make a... You can't do what you do and not be called on it every once in a while. All right, anyways, no word on pricing or release date, though they have confirmed that Dirac processing will be applied to the expanded height channels. Now, Tom feels that his surround back channels are very important. He even boosts them 2 dB or so and feels that they add a lot to his sense of envelopment. He has also read that most people who start out with only 2 overhead speakers eventually upgrade to 4 and feel that 4 overhead speakers are substantially better than 2. Okay. Now, so anyways, he was thinking that if he ends up with a 5.2.4 configuration, he could split the surround channel signals and just duplicate the surround channels in the surround back speakers. Okay. What do we think would sound better, 7.2.2 with only 2 overhead speakers or 5.2.4 with the surround channels being duplicated by the surround back speakers? Well, I don't think you should do that second one. Let's start with that.
Yeah, dude, don't duplicate
Don't
the
do
surround
that.
channels
No.
in the physical surround back speakers and the physical surround speakers. And the whole reason why I would say don't do that is because you're going to object-based audio, and you want discrete sounds to be able to come from somewhere behind you. And you already have surround back speakers installed. They're already elevated, so that's being shown in our little screen share feature if you're watching the video. So you can see he's got elevated surround back speakers at the back of the room.
Yes.
There's another photo here that's showing them about how much space. So he's got, what, about 2.5, maybe 3 feet from the back wall to the back of his second row. He's got 2 rows of seats.
Second row, right. That's important.
And it appears from the placement of his surround speakers, his side surround speakers, that back row might actually be the primary row. It's possible.
You think? I don't think so.
Well, that's the one that has a middle seat because his front row is 2 seats on either side of a little table. So neither of those is actually centered to his screen.
Oh, this is the guy that's got the little Mac Mini that's showing the...
Yeah.
I remember him. Anywho, yeah, maybe you're right. I don't know. I feel like his front seats are still his main seats. I do. Because it's got the table for you to put your drink on, stuff like that. And
in either case, though, I would want to keep those... Now, you don't have to necessarily label those surround back speakers as surround back speakers anymore. You could call them rear heights.
Right? I think that's what... I honestly feel like that's the direction he should be going. He should be going... He should call those surround backs, he should call them rear heights, and then install some top fronts or top middles, depending on where he wants to put them or where he can put them. And then in your head, call it 7.2.4. But with only 5 speakers, though.
Well, it would. I mean, if what are currently his surround back speakers, he relabels as rear heights and then adds a pair of overhead speakers, it would be a 5.2.4 system. Now, the one reason he might want to continue calling them surround backs and end up with a 7.2.2 system would be if he still wants to be able to listen to Dolby True HD, DTS HD master audio without any upmixing. And still listen to it in just 7.1 without any upmixing applied to make use of the overhead speakers, then you'd want to still call it, a 7-speaker setup with 2 overheads. So, but ultimately, don't duplicate because you want that object-based audio to be able to separate between your sides and your backs.
And unless you're
panning will work.
Primarily sitting in that front row, you don't really have room for another in my mind, another set of overhead speakers because you're not with surround backs being that high and that far behind you. And only that far behind you. You can see now in the picture, if you're sitting at that back row, mostly, he's too close to have top heights as well.
That's right, yeah.
So, yeah, I would just go 5.2.4 is what I would do.
Sure. I mean, ultimately,
what he says, 7. It really doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's a matter of labeling, so that's a matter of semantics. It doesn't really you'd be changing all of that in the setup menu of the processor. You wouldn't have to be rewiring anything to do that. So yeah, either way, but ultimately you're not going to be using 11 speakers in here. You'll be using 9.
Yeah.
Right. If you go with this XMC-1 upgrade, that's the thing. You're not beholden to that. You could have a 7.2.4 capable processor right this second. If you wanted, because they exist and they're darn
probably
good.
For less than whatever this upgrade is going to be.
Yeah, that's the thing. So that's one of his questions actually coming.
So he doesn't really want a different processor, but of course he could replace his XMC-1 with something that can do genuine 7.2.4. Now, I just want to say, you could do that right now.
Yes.
And by the time you're ready to upgrade again, Emotiva might actually be rolling this thing out.
Yeah, so, it could be 3 years from now when the XMR actually comes out.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. Anyways, if he did, how would you determine the best placement for 4 overhead speakers when he has 2 rows of seats? Dolby seems to recommend top fronts and top rears most highly, but with 2 rows of seats, where exactly should those speakers go? Therein lies the rub, is that your back row is too close to the back wall to have rear heights and surround backs.
Well, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't have rear heights. I probably wouldn't have top rears. What I would do is the advice that I've been giving for a while now, which is leave your surround backs where they are. I'm totally fine with those being elevated and being 2.5, 3 feet behind that back row. Go about 5 feet in front of those, which should put, we're talking about on the ceiling, but about 5 feet, just 2-dimensional distance. So about 5 feet from that back wall, meaning they'll be slightly in front of your rear row, but a little bit behind your front row.
Right.
And I mean, again, it's a matter of semantics what you label them. You could call that top rears. Like if your front row is your primary row, maybe you label them top rears. If your back row is your primary row, you'd probably label them top middles because they'd be just slightly in front of you, which is totally within the range. So the graphic I'm showing on the video right now is just the angles for any of these positions. So don't worry about deciding on the name first. Just place it at that 5-foot distance from the back wall on the ceiling, and then go, okay, what is my primary row? Because I'm not sure if you consider your back row, your front row, your primary row. But decide which one is my primary row, and then now that I have these speakers on the ceiling, 5 feet in from the back wall, what angle range does that fall within? Does it fall within top rears? Does it fall within top middles? It's probably going to be one of the two, and that's what you label it. Then go another 5 feet in front of those, so now 10 feet from your back wall. Have another pair of speakers on the ceiling, 10 feet from the back wall, and again, just figure out, depending on which row you consider your primary row, are those top fronts or are they front heights, right? That's the way I would come at this. If you want to have 4 ceiling speakers, I just put them I'd stagger them by 5 feet.
I think the only problem that he might run into, and I'm going to click off the graphic now.
Yeah.
The only problem he might run into is that if he does this, if he puts those speakers up there, and he waits for Emotiva to come out with something, it very well may be that he ends up in a situation much like we've seen with some receiver manufacturers, where they are extremely picky about what you can and cannot choose as your speakers. So you may actually have speakers that are in the wrong place for what they say.
Which is perhaps another reason to not wait for the Emotiva upgrade, because if you get a Denon or Marantz model, they are pretty darn flexible. I mean, granted, you could not have top fronts and top middles because you can't have adjacent speakers. Right?
Yeah.
But you could have front heights and top middles, or you could have top fronts and top rears, or you could have...
If you're sitting in that back row, you're going to end up having like top... Well, maybe middles is what you would call them.
Probably.
And then front heights.
Front heights, yeah.
Is what you're going to end up with. If you're sitting in that first row, then you might be able to get away with, I think you still have...
Top fronts, top rears. Right?
Yeah.
That's probably what it would come out to be.
Probably pretty close. Those I might even cheat those forward and just do middles and heights anyways. But just based on how much distance he's got. And I also want to say, I'm wondering why he's feeling the need to boost his rear channels 2 dB. I'm thinking that maybe the microphone placement when he did this setup, maybe the microphone wasn't high enough to get over the back of the seats.
I'm
I
thinking
don't
he
know.
just likes to notice sounds coming from behind
It could
him.
be. It could be. But I'm just saying that you might want to think about rerunning your Odyssey or what. No, he doesn't have Odyssey. Well, forget it. He's running an Emotiva. Anyways,
Yeah,
it's
it's
fine.
got Dirac.
It's got Dirac.
So I mean, he's very happy with Dirac. That's kind of why he wants to keep it. I will say, given the relative price of that thing, you could actually get like a very capable AV receiver, like the Marantz SR7010 or the Denon AVR X6200W, which are both like $1,500 if you get them from accessories for less, and then pay the $1,000 for the mini DSP with Dirac in it, which granted will only do 8 channels for you, but I wouldn't worry so much about those overhead speakers getting it. It's not really that big of a deal.
All right. As for what speakers to use, he recalls us mentioning focal speakers as a good timbre match for us. He likes the idea of something like Superbird on walls because of the right mounts. He can aim them as if he's not able to place them in the perfect location. Our thoughts. Well, first of all, those surround back speakers he has, I'm pretty sure are those Emotiva.
They look like it. Yep.
Dipole, whatever things,
Yep.
and he's got those
ones.
angled down too, which I think, frankly, is not really necessary. The tweeters fire out the side, and there's a woofer in the front, so angling them makes. I can't imagine that makes any real difference. I mean, they're supposed to be a diffuse sound, anyways, which we normally wouldn't recommend for surround backs, anyways. But that's what he's got, so it's fine. But specifically with Atmos speakers, the whole idea is that they're supposed to be firing straight down, and you're getting the off axis. It's not supposed to be really super localizable.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to aim them at yourself. You're supposed to have them go straight down. That's the thought.
Yeah, where people are finding they have to aim their Atmos speakers that are on the ceiling is if they are using speakers that don't have very wide dispersion, right? Dolby wants you to use speakers that have very wide dispersion. So some people are just installing speakers that happen to not have that, and then they're finding, to actually get the sound where I need it, then I need to angle it. So if you get speakers that have very wide dispersion, then you just have them firing straight down exactly like Dolby wants you to. So he mentioned the Focal Super Birds, is that? Yeah, so which are the larger ones. I wouldn't say those are necessary. I say the Bird would actually be the far easier model to mount on the ceiling. They're available from Accessories for Less for $150 each. And even though they look very compact, they're actually bigger than you might think because they're a 5.5-inch driver with a separate 3/4-inch tweeter. So they're not as tiny as they appear just because they're kind of a very compact shape.
Right.
But the Bird model is really nice because it comes with 2 different little feet. It's full swivel capability. And they call them a ceiling mount, a wall ceiling desktop mount. You can mount them anywhere. So I would, if that's the style you want, like you just like the size and the shape of them, and they're a great shape for putting on your ceiling. They're like perfect for that application. Then yeah, I would actually go for the Bird model. They've got plenty of power handling. You do not need those ceiling speakers to play any lower than about a 200 hertz, to be honest.
Yeah.
So they can play down to like 70. They're totally fine. So yeah, I'd go for those. Those would be great. They have exceedingly wide dispersion because they've got essentially no baffle on them whatsoever. And those would work really well. The other option would be to just go to Ascend Acoustics, since that's what you have for front speakers, and get their HTM-200s, which are actually even less expensive right now. They're like $260 for a pair, so they're a little less expensive than the Focal Birds. However, with the Ascends, you'd have to buy ceiling mounts. With the Focals, they come with, so ultimately the price is about $300 a pair. It's going to be about the same either way you go. So either of those is a really good option.
Yeah. All right. Srini? Yeah. Anyways, he's got some Logitech Squeezebox players around the house. Now, Logitech Squeezebox players are just players, right? They're just a source. They're
a network connected player.
Right.
So they connect to your Wi-Fi network, and that way you can sort of it's a whole house.
I know what it is. I had
thing,
one, but it sounds like he makes it this makes it sound like he's got them around and they play music, but they don't. They connect to speakers, which then have to play music or some sort of amplifier or something. Unless he's got something different than I'm aware of. But every Squeezebox I've ever had was just basically a source. Anywho, He likes the sound of them, but finds them somewhat inconvenient and doesn't really like the form factor, so he'd like to replace them with some speakers with Bluetooth and Google Cast capability.
Okay, the link that was sent was to a thing called the Squeezebox Radio, which was self-contained, has a speaker on it.
Yep. Hold on. Oh, yes, I see it now. All right. Yeah.
So that makes sense.
All right, makes more sense now. All right, because I just hadn't seen one of those. Anyways, he wants to get something else. He'd like good linear sound. Doesn't want to spend more than $200 or $300 per unit. Any recommendations? There literally are thousands of Bluetooth speakers up there. I don't understand why.
But Google Cast speakers is the.
But why does he have to have Google Cast? I don't quite understand that part. Why is that?
I guess
because if you can stream it from your phone, you can stream it. I guess the idea is that once you start it, then you can use your phone to do something else.
Yeah, that's what's nice about the Google Cast system. So as far as I know, the only ones that are available to buy right now are from LG, and everyone says they sound terrible.
Right.
So Vizio will be coming out with some Google Cast speakers, because they are all in on Google Cast over there at Vizio.
Right.
But I don't know when, and I don't know how good they're going to be. So as far as your selection of actual speakers that come with Google Cast already built in, it's pretty darn limited right now. I'm sure the selection will grow. But right now, it's pretty darn limited. So using a Chromecast audio, which is only $35, makes a heck of a lot of sense, because you could have a regular Bluetooth speaker that just has a 3.5 auxiliary jack input and just plug your Chromecast audio into that, and voila, now that speaker is a Chromecast, is a Google Cast capable
right. And
device.
all Bluetooth speakers have that.
We better not say all. I'm sure there's some that don't, but whatever. Almost all.
Many, most of them do. So I've reviewed the BenQ one with the little electrostatic panels, which I think I use all the time. What is the Creative iRoar whatever thing? That one actually, a lot of people like that. I mean, I've taken it to other places and they like it. I've heard like the big round thing from Hardin Cardin. Is that what it is? It looks like a big foamy frisbee that stands up, and that one's fine.
I'm not sure.
I've seen so many of these things, dude. They're everywhere. There's Bose ones. There's all sorts of ones, and most of these have some sort of 3.5 millimeter jack. And on top of that, you literally could get those little audio engine speakers and plug those in and use, because they have a built-in amp. And not only that, you could get something like studio monitors.
Sure.
Right? Because most of those have and
just use your Chromecast audio as your source.
That's right. So and just there's just so many options. So
there are a lot. Yeah.
It depends on sort of what if they're going to stay right where they are. Excuse me, and you're looking for stereo separation, I would get separate speakers. But if you want something that's just going to play some music, so many Bluetooth speakers out there, or at least decent.
Yeah.
I like the iCreative one, is it iCreative? No, Creative. No, crap. What's the name of that stupid speaker? I'm gonna have to look it up. All right, you talk.
Okay. Well, I was gonna recommend. I mean, just as far as a Bluetooth speaker that for sure has a 3.5 millimeter auxiliary in jack from Fluence. Their FI50. It's a nice little unit. It's 5.25 inch driver, I think, on either side, with a separate tweeter, 40 watts of power to each speaker. And I mean, by all accounts, darn nice sound. It's a very nice build quality, good looking little unit, nice interface with an easy to read white display on the front. And I mean, it is just a Bluetooth speaker. It does have aptX, so if your device that you're sending it from supports that aptX codec, this Fluence works with that. And then to do Google Cast, you would have to connect the Chromecast audio to it. But given that it's $200, and you said you're willing to spend between $200 and $300, the extra $35 for the Chromecast audio is still within that budget. The other thing I would say is, if you go over to Accessories for Less, they do have a selection of Bluetooth speakers there. One that's kind of interesting is Yamaha's, because if you're interested in their Music Cast system that Yamaha has, then they have a speaker that works with that. However, that Yamaha Music Cast speaker is one that does not have a 3.5 auxiliary in jack, so that throws out the whole Google Cast thing. But if you were thinking you might transition to a different whole house audio system in the form of Yamaha's Music Cast, Yamaha does have those speakers available from Accessories for Less. So those are my suggestions. I like that Fluence one.
So it's the one I was looking at was the Creative Sound Blaster Roar. They
Okay.
have it's 150 right now. You've been using it wrong this whole stupid time. You're supposed to lay it down on its back. I didn't realize that.
Ah.
I never saw a picture of it like that. It was always standing up in the pictures. Anyways, it's got speakers on the bottom that you're supposed to shoot out. Anyways, that one's I really liked it. And I thought it played just fine. And it's got the bass boost if you really want it, sort of thing. And it's got NFC connections so that you can just kind of grab it. It's portable. It will charge everything, all that. They actually have a new one coming up, which I have. It's called the iRoar. So this is a Sound Blaster Roar. There's the iRoar as well.
Okay.
And the iRoar is crazy. It's like insane. Quite literally, it is got the kinds of functionality you're like, what? Why would you even need that? The iRoar, it's like $370 or something. It's really expensive, but it's like twice the size, and it will it connects to like everything. And once again, remember if you remember in my review of the other one, you can put a little chip in there and then record whatever conversations are going on and all this other stuff.
Right.
This one definitely supports aptX, and not only that, it's got a USB little key thing that you stick into a computer, and that little that's a Bluetooth aptX connection. So if you've got a computer that doesn't support aptX, or you've got a device that has I think it's got to be a computer. Anyways, it will stream aptX, so you'll get CD quality sound, well, at least theoretically, out of it.
So yeah, I mean, I like that audio engine idea as well, because like those A2 just powered speakers are great sounding speakers. And if you're just plugging the Chromecast audio into those, and then I was noticing on Audio Engine's website, they do have a self-contained Bluetooth speaker as well. They call it their B2. It's $300. So we know Audio Engine makes good sounding products. So that's an option too. It's just within your price range. But, there it is. But that one you would have to add. It does have a 3.5 millimeter auxiliary input jack, so you'd have to add the Chromecast audio to have Google Cast on that Audio Engine B2.
Right. Both of those creative speakers I mentioned, you can actually double them up and pair it. You can use them as stereo speakers, and you put a cord between them, and it works that way. Anyways, Brock is trying to decide between a Yamaha RX A3050 or a Denon AVR X6200W, or possibly the 7200WA. What features should he be weighing in order to decide? He doesn't plan to use the MusicCast whole audio system. So that's not a factor. He's read that Yamaha can apply Dolby surround upmixing to DTS signals and DTS Neural X upmixing to Dolby signals, while the Denon models cannot.
That is all true.
But is that something you should even care about?
Not in my opinion.
I don't see why. I don't see why.
Yeah. Dolby surround upmixing sounds fine when what's coming in is a Dolby Digital or Dolby True HD signal, and DTS Neural X upmixing sounds fine when what's coming in is a DTS or DTS HD signal. So, in my opinion, it's not a big deal not having the cross-pollination of upmixers.
Anyways, he already owns a Yamaha RX A3000, but he's not particularly fond if it's GUI, graphical user interface, for those of you that just woke up in the 20th century, 21st century. So he's entirely willing to consider a different brand. Which AV receiver? I already let go of what I was going to say. Which AV receiver should he choose? Honestly, if you're not going to use this MusicCast and you don't like how the Yamaha functions, first of all, I can't promise you're going to like the Denon anymore.
I'd kind of be surprised if you don't, because their current menus, and especially their initial setup wizard, when you first, it's good.
Yeah,
it's good.
Odyssey.
Yes.
Odyssey.
Yeah.
Odyssey. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to keep saying that until you buy
Odyssey versus YPOW. That's, I mean, here's the thing.
Yeah.
If whole house audio is a big deal to you, I really do like Yamaha's MusicCast system. So to me, that's the thing. That's the key feature that Yamaha offers that would lean me towards a Yamaha in a given situation. If that's not a factor, I'm leaning Denon or Marantz all the way, because I prefer that. Now, this is me, but I prefer the Odyssey Multi-Q XT32 auto setup and automatic EQ features more than YPOWs. More than that, they are more flexible in terms of what you can label your Atmos speakers.
Right.
So in the Yamahas, you are limited to fronts and rears. It's either front heights and rear heights, or top fronts and top rears. That's what you can name things and that's it. They don't have top middles as an option, although if you only have 2 overhead speakers, it just automatically assumes they're top middles no matter what you name them. So that's yet another kind of constraint that Yamaha places on you. So the Denon and Marantz are more flexible that way. I prefer their auto setup. I definitely prefer their GUI. So all of those things make me lean towards Denon or Marantz when MusicCast is not a factor.
Right. And other than that, the real things that you need to be looking for is whether or not it's got the version of Odyssey you want, because we already kind of said that, but let's get that out of the way. Does that have the right number and the right types of inputs, including pre-outs or analog inputs?
Yeah.
If that's
all of these have all of these Denon and Marantz ones at this level have 13.2 pre-outs.
Does it have everything you need as far as number of zones and all that stuff? Chances are anything in this price or in this tier will have everything that you need. So the differences will be features you won't use but sound nice, and wattages that you won't need but sound good on paper. So get the cheapest one that has everything that you need. Right. And when I say need, I mean that you will actually use. Because so many things that people buy, they are like, oh, I've got this. I'm like, you use that? Oh, no, I don't use it. But well, I've got it.
A like great case in point.
AirPlay. I've got AirPlay on my receiver. Dude, you have an Android phone. I know, but I have it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, a great case in point. There are 2 things that the AVR X7200WA, their flagship, offers over the AVR X6200W. Because if you look at them, you're like, man, these are pretty similar on the spec sheet, and boy, are they ever. But the 7200WA offers 7.1 analog inputs. If for some reason you still need 7.1 analog inputs, that's something the X6200W does not have.
There's a hipster out there right now trying to connect his record player to that. I don't understand. Where do I put things?
And the AVR X7200WA has a very cool feature, which is highly uncommon on any AV receivers, which is fully assignable amplifiers.
Yeah.
So what's cool about that is, let's say you have a 7-channel external amp. You're going to need at least a 2-channel external amp if you want to run 11 speakers, because all of these models have 9 amplifiers built in. But with the X7200WA, you can assign those 9 internal amps to quite literally anything you want, including Zone 2 and Zone 3. So you could say, I have 7 of my main speakers powered by an external amplifier. I still have 9 internal amps that I could use. I'm going to use 4 of those for my overhead speakers, and then I still have 5 left over that I can use to power stereo in Zone 2, stereo in Zone 3, and mono in Zone 4, right? Like, you can assign it to do that if you want to. So the X7200WA is exceedingly flexible with what you can do with its internal amps. But if you're not going to be making any use of that, and you're not going to use 7.1 analog inputs, then the 6200W saves you some money and does everything else that the 7200WA does. And if you don't need the fully assignable amps, but you really want those 7.1 analog inputs, the Marantz SR7010 has all the features of the AVR X6200W, but it adds 7.1 analog inputs. Woo! And it's the same price as the 6200W. So.
And it's sexier. Let's just be honest.
If you just like the front face better. Yeah.
I do. I like that little porthole. Anywho.
So that's it. That's the nitty gritty.
That's, yeah. And don't be afraid to go down the line looking at until you get to something that has
I think just he wants 11 speakers because he's looking at models that do 11 speakers. So.
Probably. He probably does. But if you're not actually going to use it, if you just think you might someday use it, just be honest with yourself, dude. So many people overbuy, and that includes me. Jim on Facebook thanked us for our suggestion a couple of weeks ago for his attic theater. He used some spare speaker grill cloth and some regular pink insulation and made himself some DIY absorption panels.
Yeah.
He put them behind his seats and says they work very well.
Nice.
Good. And
awesome.
I think if I remember correctly, when you're as close to the wall as you are, anything is going to be a good idea back
And that is totally, spare speaker grill cloth and pink insulation works totally fine.
Yeah, especially for that high frequency stuff that's going to be bouncing off.
The dialogue bouncing off that back wall.
He also clarified that his center speaker is just the lone speaker that was on the floor. I was right. And it's got a powered, a Pioneer tweeter and 2 Bose woofers.
I have identified the first speaker I would replace in your system.
The other speakers we saw are his front B speakers connected to a different amp.
Yeah. So he had 2 sets of bookshelf speakers, remember?
Yeah, I remember that.
And we were like, he's using like a triple center? Nope. It's front B speakers with the other ones.
Since I said the surround back speakers that are mounted on the slope ceiling on the back wall might not be adding very much, what do we think about adding front height speakers instead? I don't. What isn't this guy like sitting like real close to these? I'm trying to remember this room. How far away?
He's got the sloped back and the sloped front because it's in the attic.
That's right, but he's sitting pretty close to everything, isn't he?
Yeah, he's about like 10 feet away from his screen.
Oh, 10 feet's not that bad. Yeah. Well, I guess I go for heights. His chair's right against the back wall, though, right?
More or less, yeah. I mean, he's got a little bit of space, but because
that's why we said that the surround.
Yeah, the surround backs are almost like overheads.
Yeah, they're
really
like,
what they are because they're on the sloped ceiling.
They're basically like headphones. Yeah. You could put them up front, I suppose. I guess you'd have to rip them out, or.
Well, you can use the sloped front ceiling wall.
That's what I mean. I think that's exactly it. You're going to end up. I really don't. Man, I guess he's got the speakers, so he wants to do it.
He does have. Yeah, he has speakers around. So, golly.
I just kind of think you should just go with 5.2 and just go with that.
I mean, the thing is, even though I advocate for Atmos. I think it's pretty cool. But as far as just because, like, he's got an older receiver that's not an Atmos receiver.
Right.
So it's got, like, Dolby Pro Logic 2Z, right? That's essentially the outmixer he'd be using. And I'm like, I've never been hugely impressed with Dolby Pro Logic 2Z. Like, but he does have a big projection screen.
Yeah.
So
the problem is just like anything with sloped ceiling is going to be it's not going to be placed the right way, basically, because it's going to be firing either at your feet or directly at you. You know what I mean?
There's not going to be elevated.
It is elevated. So yeah, I would say front heights would be a better idea than the surround backs. You definitely don't need surround backs.
What I would say, Jim, is like if you're just you like to do projects and you're like, you know what, I'm not really making use of these surround back speakers, so I might as well put up some front heights and get use of the 7 amps that I have built into my receiver. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm giving you a thumbs up to give that a try. But what I would not say is go to an extreme effort to do this because it will blow your mind once you're done. I'm like, nah, this isn't going to be like a huge upgrade for you. But if you're just like, hey, I like to do projects anyway, then
I agree with that. I'm sort of like
a little bit ambivalent.
Be prepared. Be prepared to just turn them off.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what I kind of think.
Yeah.
All right. I already said that one. Jim's Denon AVR S700W is producing some low popping and distortion sounds from the surround back front height zone 2 binding post outputs. Okay. The actual outputs or the speakers are making the noise?
That's what I'm wondering. Yeah. Have you tried? Because, I mean, so the reason they're, like, we labeled them as surround back / front height / zone 2 is because they are the assignable 6th and 7th speaker binding posts, which is quite common on a lot of AV receivers. So in the setup menu, you can say, I use this 6th and 7th binding post as surround back speakers or front height speakers or to power a zone 2. So he's saying, yeah, when he's got those connected, he's hearing these low popping distortion sounds. And he's also saying it's not consistent. Like on some sources it's there and on other sources he's never heard it. Could you try just connecting those binding posts to say your front, left, and right speakers and seeing if that continues? Because his surround back speakers right now are installed in wall. He obviously ran speaker wire inside the wall. And I'm like, maybe it's the speaker wire connection.
It'd be faster just to take that surround back speaker wire and connect it to your fronts. And then
there's
just
that too.
Play, because you're going to get a lot more content out that way.
Yeah,
I'm
flip them.
Guessing that whatever it is, it's not consistent because surround backs don't get that much information anyways. So how consistent should it be? And if you're he doesn't happen using as an Xbox or as Amazon Fire Stick. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be that he doesn't. Maybe does he not have it set for? I don't know.
Like Pro Logic 2X.
Yeah, like it happens on Blu-rays because that's discrete 7 point whatever.
Yeah.
And these other things, he's not maybe using the Dolby Pro Logic or the DTSX.
Yeah, like maybe it's not outputting any sound from the surround back channels it's just doing 5 speakers.
Yeah, it
in
could
which
just
case,
be.
obviously, you wouldn't hear it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we need to nail this down. So what you need to do is connect those binding posts to other speakers, connect your physical surround back speakers to a different set of binding posts. So just take your front left and right and your surround back left and right and swap them
Yeah.
on the back of your AV receiver and see what happens. Because
And they
now, if your front speakers start popping, then it is coming from the AV receiver. Whereas if the surround back speakers are still popping when they're connected to the front left and right binding posts,
Which is what I think is gonna happen.
then you know it's the speakers or the speaker wires. So we need to identify that first. That would be the first step here, Jim.
And he also says he sent it to a local shop, but they didn't find anything. So
Yeah.
should he send it to Denon? And the answer is no. You should do
Not
what
yet.
you just said.
Do this check first.
All right. Now, Jeb and Jeff, they both asked this question.
They both had
independently?
this same suggestion.
All right. Anyways, they heard what we said about setting up 4 subs by matching them in pairs, according to what Odyssey sets the distances to, and it gave them, I guess, an idea. What about after running Odyssey with pairs of subs to get the initial distances, you then started using the manual phase controls to get them even more closely matched before running Odyssey the final time with all 4? Neither of them have tried it yet, I'm guessing. But it seems to them, I'm having to change the pronouns here.
I know.
On the fly. I'm just multitasking. It would be better to do the tweaking at that stage rather than a trial and error at the end. Yeah, you could do that.
Yeah, I mean,
fine idea. Nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely, yeah. So like what we're saying is, so 4 subwoofers, but you only have 2 subwoofer outputs, independent subwoofer outputs, because this was all about Jefferson's setup, where he now has 4 SB13 Ultra subwoofers, and he has a processor that has multi-Q XT32 with sub EQ HT, which does 2 independent subwoofer signals. So yeah, this idea will definitely work when you have sub EQ HT. So you start by measuring the distances of just 2 subwoofers, write those down, then measure the distances of the other 2 subwoofers according to what Odyssey is setting.
Right, well, Odyssey to give
write those down, and then you go, okay, like let's say subwoofer 1 came out and it says it's 11 feet away, and subwoofer 2 came out and it says it's 12 feet away, and subwoofer 3 came out and it says it's 8 feet away, and subwoofer 4 came out and it says it's 8.5 feet away. They're like, okay, 11 and 12 are closer together than 8 and 8.5, so just use the manual phase knob on subwoofer 2 and subwoofer 4 to make them, according to Odyssey, the same distance as what subwoofer 1 and subwoofer 3 are.
You'll be running Odyssey a whole bunch, but yes, this is fine. Yeah, there's absolutely no reason why you can't do that.
But the final step still stands, which is that sub EQ HT does not always nail it. Right? It's attempting to do time alignment, which when you're in an oddly shaped room, a non-rectangular room, and maybe your whole theater setup is just offset so it's not symmetrical to the walls that are in that room, it's attempting to time align things in the hopes that by time aligning them you will get more uniform response from seat to seat. But ultimately the end result is unpredictable, and even sub EQ HT doesn't always nail it. So this is definitely worth a try. I mean, I didn't say this, but Jeb and Jeff both had this idea, and they're both correct. This is certainly worth a try.
Yes. But every time you run Odyssey, those distances are going to be a little different anyway. Yeah. Basically,
a little bit, yeah.
So it's it's not like exact every single time.
But you still need to do the final step that I talked about, which is still ultimately measuring in all of your seats and looking for uniform response, and still possibly just having to go back to manual trial and error to really nail that down. Because sub EQ HT, it does a fine job most of the time, but it doesn't always nail it. So I like this idea, and then continue on after that.
All right, Infinite Gary. Well,
yes.
Here's another marathon. I really don't know how many he's got here. We'll see here. Anyways, he was watching the TV series Turn on AMC. I haven't seen it. What's it about?
It is
racing. It's like a racing thing. Is it racing?
No, not Civil War. It's like the founding of America, I think. George Washington and that.
He also has Turn on Blu-ray, and noticed that the picture quality from his cable box was lacking compared to Blu-ray. His cable box only outputs 1080i, while this Blu-ray is obviously 1080p. Is the resolution really making all the difference, or are there other factors involved?
Other factors
are bandwidth. They have to shove 100 billion channels worth of garbage down reality TV, down that copper wire or fiber optic cable, depending on where you live. Or over the satellite
Mm-hmm.
you, depending on where you are. And therefore, they have to compress it. They
Yeah.
have to compress that signal so that it's awful. I mean, the
And on
difference
top of that, TV is MPEG-2 compression.
That's right.
Blu-ray is MPEG-4 compression, which is much more efficient. It's about twice as efficient.
Right.
Yeah, so it's two things. You've got more efficient compression being used on Blu-ray, plus Blu-rays go about 35, 40 megabits per second. TV, if you were getting the full quality, which you're not on cable, but if you were getting the full quality, would be 19 megabits per second. So already you're about twice the data rate with compression that's about twice as good, about twice as efficient. That all leads up to the Blu-ray looks significantly clearer than what's coming from your cable.
And if you've ever doubt that, just watch any sporting event ever.
Yeah.
you could totally see the compression whenever you're seeing anything like that
on cable.
On
even
cable.
versus over the air, because over the air is actually giving you, well, not always the full 19 megabits per second.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's 12 because they're splitting it off and using part of the bandwidth to send out a standard definition signal still.
Yeah.
But, over the air, you're often getting the full 19 megabits per second, still MPEG-2 compression. But that looks way better than what comes over most cable providers, because cable providers are crunching it down to like 6-7 megabits per second for that.
It's awful.
And it's still MPEG-2.
All right, Gary has been using the Sony MDR V6 headphones. This is the older brother of the MDR 7506 since they came out in 1985.
Yep.
He still thinks they sound great, but how do they stand up to newly released headphones? Did headphones get there in the evolution of technology back in 1985? I have no clue. I would have to hear these headphones to know.
Yeah, there are many people who claim that they're identical, and they're not. They do have exceedingly similar shapes and designs, and yes, the MDR6 V6s were essentially the older brother of the 7506s. They've been around a little bit longer. The 7506s were essentially an update, and the V6s were what you would find in studios. All recording studios had those Sony MDR V6s, and now they all...
They'd be very, very flat. To be honest with you, Gary, if I could speak from a general level here, I think that headphone technology in recent years has in many ways gotten worse. I don't believe that it's because the technology hasn't matured or whatever. I believe that they're making them for specific people who want to
the way things are being tuned to taste.
So I would imagine that now there's lots of examples of where this is probably not true. And there are 1985, I have no idea how many really good headphones there were out there, but these were probably very good. And I would feel like they would probably stand up pretty well to most of the stuff made now.
Yeah, actually, the wire cutter, who recommend the Sony MDR 7506s as their current best overall headphone for multiple uses and for well under $150. You can find it for under $100 a lot of places. They actually did compare them directly to the MDR V6s, and they're like the MDR V6s. Essentially, they're like the 7506s tightened everything up a little bit. Yeah. They're like the bass got a little bit less flabby. You got a little bit more definition in the mid bass. The highs went a little bit higher, and everything just kind of tightened up just a little bit. And that might just because that could even be just because the V6s they happen to be listened to were older.
Yeah,
they are a physical moving thing. Maybe they just worn in a little bit. But ultimately, that's what they said, and that to me makes a lot of sense. Like the 7506s are like the standard in every studio in the world. They're very flat, so they're like, they just tighten it all up a little bit.
All right, Gary is interested in the LG 65-inch B6P OLED TV, although he doesn't want to spend the $6,000 to buy it. But suppose he was to buy it.
Sure,
would he be missing any features that the 2017 models TVs might have? Also, have they improved their upscaling of 1080i and 1080p sources? Are we really worried about them upscaling 1080i and 1080p? Is that something we're worried about? The only...
I mean, there's plenty of set-top boxes that are only going to be sending out 1080p.
Yes, and they'll be sending it out to your Oppo that you'll buy, Gary, to do the.
There is always that
scaling. So yeah.
Actually, even the Oppo's 4K upscaling isn't like the be-all end-all.
Well, I'm saying that eventually the Oppo is going to come out with an Ultra HD Blu-ray, and they'll probably have the best scalers in there, and they'll have.
I don't.
They're not going to get rid of that pass-through.
I don't
sure
really
they're not.
know if their upscaling has improved at all from last year. LG claims it has.
Well, they always say
market that they have, but yeah, exactly. When have they?
When have they said,
ever
"Oh, we kind of
it
it's
got worse"? Or
the
stayed
same great upscaling you hated so much last year"?
That's right.
We got that again.
But we haven't really seen the reviews come out yet. I'm waiting for like David Katzenmeyer's review, basically, because he's the guy I probably trust the most on TV reviews. So when that comes out, we'll find out if the upscaling has improved at all. I'm not sure yet. As for what features might be added to next year's models, well, there is that whole pesky HDR10 might be getting dynamic metadata thing. We don't know how that's going to work out. It might require a hardware upgrade if they are stupid beyond belief. But I wouldn't put it past them. So that's possible. There are other HDR systems still out there. There's the hybrid log gamma that might be part of broadcast TV. We don't know if that'll need a new processor or something. This could be ongoing.
Know, Gary. So you're not going to buy it anyway, so don't worry about it.
But as far as what's available right now, minus 3D, because the B6 models don't have 3D. Shock of shocks. I know Gary doesn't care about 3D. But as far as everything else, they got Dolby Vision, they got HDR10, they are HDR Premium certified. So
I'm glad that we have a premium certification.
They check all the boxes that we have today. I mean,
what more could you ask for, Gary?
Yeah, if I had the money
yeah,
and I were buying a flat panel, this is what I would buy today. I would buy one of these LG OLEDs from this year because they check all the boxes that I'm personally looking for. Could I maybe get screwed over next year because some new thing comes out? Yes, I might, but I don't know for a fact that I will. So I feel pretty good recommending them.
Joe Kane was on the This is still Gary. Joe Kane was on the Home Theater Geeks podcast this past week and made some comments about HDR that were confusing and got some of the AVS forum members riled up. That doesn't sound like AVS. That doesn't sound like them at all. Primarily, it seemed that his proposal for a 10-bit P3 color SDR signal using traditional gamma, which he claimed could actually look better than HDR10 signal in some instances. Can we explain what he was talking about?
I believe I can. I believe I can.
I didn't. I was too busy trying to get this computer to work with all my technology. I got to this question and went, "What? I have to read? I'm not going to AVS." And that's
so there are two things. I think the biggest crux of the matter is Joe was largely talking about projectors, which is something that hasn't really been addressed a lot when it comes to high dynamic range. But that's what he was mostly talking about, and so that brings in a whole different thing because HDR in projectors, if you're talking about like Dolby cinemas where they have actual laser HDR projectors, they actually top out at 100 nits. And you might say, well, 100 nits, that's SDR. That's where the old SDR signals topped out, and that's absolutely correct. And that's more or less what Joe was getting at, which is that in projectors, even when it's an HDR signal, they top out at 100 nits anyway. And that's about twice as bright as a full white field on a cinema projector used to get. We're used to these figures of like 14 to 16 foot Lamberts for a full white field. That translates to about 48 to 50 nits. So going up to 100 nits is basically doubling the maximum light output in a cinema. So that's the one side of it. He was mostly talking about projectors. The other side of it was that when you have an HDR display, right now, all of the HDR systems that we're using use this SMPTE ST2084 electro-optical transfer function. And he explained kind of briefly and a little bit confusingly that the electro-optical transfer function is literally this value equals this nit light output. It is a one-to-one value to nit light output curve. So it's hard locked, which is different from gamma, because gamma was just a curve that you could, like, as long as you fall on that curve, the actual ultimate high and low could be adjusted. Whereas using this new perceptual quantizer or ST2084 or electro-optical transfer function for HDR10, those are all referring to the same thing. Those are hard encoded values. This value equals this nit light output. And in an HDR10 signal, the first half of those values, so we're talking about 10-bit signals, so they have 1,024 values to begin with. So the first 512 values are hard locked for 0 to 100 nits. That's the first 50% of all of those values are just going from 0 to 100 nits. And then the remaining 50%, so the next 25% from the 50% mark up to 75% describes from 100 nits to 1,000 nits. And then the final 25% describes from 1,000 nits to 10,000 nits. So you're seeing that the steps are getting way, way bigger between each value because we're going from 0 to 100 using 512 values, and then we're using 256 values to go from 1,000 to go from 100 to 1,000, and then we're using 256 values to go from 1,000 to 10,000. That's PQ. Now he's saying if we expand the color, because we're going from BT 709 color to, at a minimum, P3 color, and perhaps all the way out to BT 2020 color, we need more values. Otherwise, we start to see color banding.
Right.
So he's saying if the projector is going to top out at 100 nits anyway, and we could, instead of using only 512 values to describe all these colors to go from 0 to 100, why not use 1,024 values to go from 0 to 100? Because that's where the projector is going to top out anyway. And now we have no color banding. We can go wider in color for the projectors because we don't have to go beyond 100 nits in projectors. Because they don't get that. They don't get brighter than that anyway. So that's why he's like, let's have an SDR signal, which tops out at 100 nits, but it uses 10 bits, but it uses all the values to describe colors so we can have wider color in a cinema projector or in a home projector. That's more or less what he... I'll fully agree it was confusing because he didn't strongly delineate between flat panels and projectors. Right? This SDR system doesn't make a ton of sense in a flat panel that can go up to 1,000 or 2,000 or 4,000 nits, because how do you get there if the signal doesn't contain that information to begin with? That doesn't make any sense. But that wasn't what he was talking about. He was talking about projectors. He did have one other good point, though, which is that in this new HDR system, with this electro-optical transfer function, the values are hard-coded. This value equals this nit light output. What if you have a really bright room? If you have a really bright room, all of those really dark values are just
wasted.
They're just going to appear as black to you. You're not going to see the shadow detail. Whereas in the old gamma system, you could shift everything up on that curve. So now your black level is actually what used to be gray, and your white is actually maybe above 100 nits, but you could shift the whole thing to account for your ambient light. He's like, think about this. Now those values are hard-coded. This value means this light output. It doesn't take into account your ambient light at all. I'm like, that's actually a really good point, Joe.
It's almost like you know what you're talking about, Joe.
Yeah. It's almost like you need a pitch black room if you're going to watch HDR, and yet they're brighter than ever in the highlights. That's kind of weird. Yeah. That's a darn good point.
All right. Joe also touched upon Dolby's new proposal for color subsampling. They've dubbed it ICTCP.
Yes.
It's like a sequel to iRobot, but lamer. And they say it can be a drop-in replacement for YCBCR signals.
Which is what we use right now.
That's what we have. But with the benefit of requiring much less processing power to convert between SDR, standard definition.
Standard dynamic range.
Dynamic range, okay. And high dynamic range, HDR. And BT 709 and BT 2020. Yeah. So what was he touching on?
Yeah, so this is interesting. I mean, this is a white paper that I wasn't aware of. I was glad he mentioned it because this is a whole new thing that I didn't even know existed. But Dolby is on top of this stuff. It's kind of cool. So to explain it just as rapidly as I can, we start with RGB. We start with just red, green, blue. That's what's captured by the camera. That's the raw video signal. It's just red, green, blue. And that red, green, blue are the color points of whatever color gamut we're using. And now we're using BT 2020, this really wide color gamut, and that is the red, green, and blue. That's what's in the initial signal. They're like, well, that's really inefficient, right? Because we're describing a bunch of colors that our displays can't show anyway, and we're using one value for all of the luminance. That's the Y channel. Y stands for luminance. I'm not sure why the letter Y stands for luminance, but it does.
L was probably taken by something.
Yeah, we're using this one value to describe luminance, and then we have these really wide color points, and if we want to convert between different color spaces and different dynamic ranges, it's like really complex math. It's it can be done by the algorithms, but you have to use up a lot of processing power to do it. They're like, let's translate that original RGB into the color points that the human eye perceives most strongly, because we have red, green, and blue cones in our eyes. Those are the photoreceptors in our eyes, and they respond most strongly to some fairly specific wavelengths of light. And those wavelengths of light don't line up perfectly with any of the color gamuts that we're using. So the first step in this new process is they translate from the RGB original signal, they translate it with pretty simple math to the color points that the human eye is the most sensitive to. And now they basically just use a different combination. So before in the YCBCR thing, what they did was they took what are all the equal amounts of red, green, and blue, and we call that black and white. That's the Y luminance channel is. All the times when the values of red, green, and blue are equal. And then the CB and the CR are color difference channels where they say, okay, take the blue channel and subtract the black and white signal from it, and take the red channel and subtract the black and white signal from it, and that way we can derive all the other colors. So it's a way of translating one type of signal, which was RGB, into a different type of signal, which was black and white plus 2 color different signals. This new system first translates the RGB into what our human eye is most sensitive to. Then they apply that electro-optical transfer function we've been talking about, because they're like, we're wasting a whole bunch of bits on steps of light that we can't see anyway. So let's first apply this electro-optical transfer function to it, and then let's use color differencing, which is they combine the red and green into one signal. That's the eye signal, which is now called intensity. And then we have 2 other color difference signals, which are like the remaining colors minus the eye channel, right? So that's why they're like, it can be a drop-in replace for YCBCR. The end math is exactly the same, but we're just shifting everything around. So if you took the whole gamut of colors, they just kind of like shifted it all around. That's more or less what they did. And the math to do it all is actually kind of simple.
There you go.
So the graph that I have on screen right now, what they're saying is, this is getting back to what Joe was talking about too. If we only have 1,024 steps to describe all the levels of light from the blackest black up to 10,000 nits, and we only have 1,024 steps to do that, and we do that using the old YCBCR signal, all of it falls within where we can visually see a difference from step to step, meaning color banding. Which is why Dolby was saying, well, Dolby Vision uses 12-bit YCBCR, which drops it all the way down to quite, almost always below the threshold of what we could ever see as color banding if we had 12-bit values instead of 10-bit values. But if we shift all those colors around to where the human eye is the most sensitive rather than relying on the original RGB, you can use 10-bit of this new ICTPC signal to basically be the same as 12-bit YCBCR. It's not quite as good, but it's almost. And if we went all the way to 12-bit ICTCP, it's like 100% below the visual threshold. So this is all about saving data. It's about using less processing power to translate between different dynamic ranges. So there's another graph. I'll try to scroll up to it. But basically, if you're able to see the graph on the YouTube video, on the left is all the translations they'd have to do between SDR and HDR if you're using YCBCR. And as you get brighter and brighter and brighter, the math gets more and more complicated, and the original value is farther and farther away from the value you want. Whereas in their new system of ICTCP, it all falls on pretty much a straight line. Yeah. So they're like, that's way simpler math. So it's pretty cool. Given that this could be done with just a firmware update, there's not much reason to not use it, but it'll only be part of Dolby Vision. So yet another reason why Dolby Vision. Like, can we just please adopt it?
I liked it better back in the day when we hated Dolby. Remember those good old days of hating Dolby? That's not the case anymore. We don't get the hate.
They're on it.
They are on it. That's good. It's good. I'm glad. Okay. Lastly, Joe Kane recommends using a bias light behind the display when watching, but professional calibrators always calibrate with a completely darkened room. Why the discrepancy? That's because professional calibrators are using instruments and not their eyes. And you want a bias. The reason for a bias light is to avoid eye strain, basically. What happens, or headaches, what happens is when you go from extremely dark to extremely bright, your eye shifts so much that it can give people headaches. It can cause discomfort. And what this allows you to do is, even when it gets really, really dark on the screen, your eye doesn't have to, the iris won't open up so much so that when it gets really bright, all of a sudden, it's having to lock down. On top of that, a lot depending on your display, it can make your display look a little bit better too, because
Yeah, like if you don't have the greatest black levels,
exactly, it gives it
raising the
gives
ambient light.
yeah, it gives it that that comparison that
Yeah, it gives you the illusion that the blacks are blacker.
yeah, because if you're in a completely black room and it goes to black and your screen's not black, you're gonna go,
that's a gray screen.
that's a gray screen. But if there's a little halo of light around your screen, you're gonna go, that looks very black to me.
That's
I got my money's worth.
And this is another instance where it's different between projectors and flat panels, because you do not want a bias light if you have a front projection setup. You want as little light as you want pitch blackness if you can get it with a projector setup, because that light will always make its way back onto the screen somehow. It will reflect off surfaces and make its way back to the screen. So you want pitch blackness for a projector always, but with a flat panel, it might be beneficial to have some bias lighting if it doesn't have the greatest black levels, or if it gets really, really bright, then you want some ambient light in the room to avoid your eye. I mean, it's like when you wake up and then you turn on the bathroom light and you're like, God, that's bright. So you don't want that when you're watching TV.
Yes, and that's exactly, if you felt that, this is exactly what we're trying to avoid. You're trying to avoid there being a dark scene in a movie for a long time, and then suddenly it's the next day and they walk outside into the sunlight. You're like, oh, geez. And so as we get into this more, higher dynamic range and higher nits and all this other stuff, that's only going to get worse. So, the option is to not be pitch black all the time in your room, in which case you're like, I kind of want to be pitch black. So. Adriano, first he got his okay, so this is the guy whose electrician wired him up some Ethernet cable for his subwoofers. I think we talked about him last week. First, he got his 2-channel sources playing in surround sound by cycling through listening modes like we suggested. For some reason, DTS Neo 6 still only seemed to be play using 2 speakers, but Dolby Pro Logic 2Z worked fine, so he's happy with that.
I don't know why, but I'll leave well enough alone at this point. He got something that
stop touching buttons. That's what I say. The only thing you're allowed to do is go to setup and go to lock. Setup lock. Yeah. And that's it. Even though it doesn't lock everything. It should lock everything.
Nah, no, it never
it doesn't.
You can always press the surround modes and go to different listening modes.
Second, it looks like he'll be going the wireless subwoofer route and will definitely be making the electrician, he put the electrician in quotes, pay for it. The Outlaw Audio OAW3 wireless system looks good, but it is out. There's 2 goods in that sentence, but it is out of stock. He emailed them and they said they can't even say when they'll have more. They're still waiting for a boat from China. He found 2 other types available locally: the Polk Audio PWSK1 and the Episode wireless subwoofer kit. The Polk seems okay, but reviews of the Episode seem mostly negative, including some that causes a hum, which he's had plenty of already. Thank you very much. The Outlaws seem to have the best latency and frequency response, so you just wait for them to be in stock and find a way to get them to Australia, where they all, where he is. Anyways, Outlaw says they don't sell or warranty sales outside North America, so I can't recommend that you do that.
No. There's the alternative, which I am convinced has the exact same internals, because all of the specs are identical, which is the Audio Engine W3 wireless audio adapter. It has a different case. It looks a little different from the outside. Every single spec is identical to the Outlaw Audio one, and the price is also the same. So I highly suspect the innards are the same thing.
I think Audio Engine is pretty, but aren't they international? I feel like they're international.
Yeah, as far as I know, they're pretty good about global shipping, and all their stuff's available through Amazon as well, which there's a decent chance you might find it just on Amazon.
They will put it on the back of a humpback whale, and they'll get you in about 3 months. So
that said, the Polk Audio one is probably fine. Honestly, I mean, I don't know. I don't have any firsthand experience with it.
If it's local, I mean, you can order this up. You could. Well, what I would do is I would just buy it and make sure they have a return policy that you can and test it out and see if you can live with it.
You only need to go from 20 to 120 hertz. Should make it.
Yeah,
golly,
it's not that hard. Also, when he eventually upgrades his AVR for Atmos to something with dual sub outputs with separate calibration, will he need a second full wireless set rather than 2 receivers being served by a single transmitter? You will need 2, dude, unless your transmitter has 2 channels.
Well, these ones do. Like the Outlaw and the Audio Engine W3, they do. They are stereo.
What about the Polk?
I don't know.
Well, there you go.
I don't know about the Polk. But the two that we've recommended, the Outlaw and the Audio Engine, they are stereo. So you can have one transmitter, and actually, I mean, theoretically, you could have only one receiver because the receiver is also stereo. But the whole point is to avoid traipsing wires around the room, and he's going to have the two subs on opposite sides of the room, like we're always recommending. So you would need two receivers in that case.
Right.
You would need to be careful that because what these have is a 3.5 millimeter stereo output jack. They come with a 3.5 millimeter stereo to red and white RCA breakout cable. That's part of the package, so you don't have to buy that separately.
Right.
So you just need to be careful that you connect the correct channel to the correct sub, which is just a little bit of trial and error. That's easy enough. But that's about the only hiccup. You don't need two transmitters with either of those systems, but the Polk one, I'm not sure. Check if it's a stereo or a mono. If it's mono, you'll need two transmitters, two receivers. If it's stereo, you need one transmitter, two receivers. Is
that it?
That's it.
All right. I'm sorry. I forgot to scroll. I usually scroll after I ask a question, so I don't have to do that. All right. Deepon again.
Yes.
Bought a calibrated U-Mic 1 from Cross Spectrum Labs. The standard unit includes a batch-tested calibration file for an on-axis measurement from 10 hertz to 20 kilohertz. But Cross Spectrum provided a calibration file that goes all the way out to 90 degrees off axis from 5 hertz to 20 kilohertz. That allows you to take all of your measurements with the microphone simply pointing straight up rather than having to reorient the mic for each speaker. So Deepon thinks that is a huge benefit for the relatively small increase in price. I had no idea. I agree with that. I had no idea they offered that. I'm glad they do. People should take advantage of it.
It is awesome.
Yeah. He thanks us for talking him down from buying the $10,000 data set. You're welcome. We only charge.
I think it's actually 12,000.
There you go. We only charge $9,000 for that, so you could just click on that buy us a cup of coffee link. Look at that.
Yeah, whatever AV receiver or process you buy, we'll gladly take the difference.
We'll take the remainder. Actually, we'll take half the remainder.
No, there's two of us. We got to split it.
Oh, that's true. I'll take half the remainder.
And there's Austin. We only get a third.
Oh, he doesn't. He works for free. Producers don't make it. We don't have to pay producers, do
okay,
we?
maybe he gets 25% and we split the remaining 75%.
Yeah,
I'm sure
we'll
Austin has stuff to say about this now.
Yeah, he should have been on the podcast. Just showed up today. Well, we're splitting up our ill-gotten gains. I think it's a reasonable thing. Anyways, it's $10,000 plus data set or other expensive processors that can go beyond 7.2.4. That said, he still likes the idea of a 9.2.4 system. When do we think lower cost or mass market models will come out that can run 13 speakers simultaneously?
Other than Emotiva's XMR1, which Lord knows when that will actually come out.
I don't think that we're going to see much of this.
I'm guessing never.
Never is my prediction. Never, yeah. Except for the off chance that Denon comes out with like a $5,000 unit that does it. That's about only...
Maybe Anthem. I'm like, Anthem's the only one I could
Anthem could maybe do it. Yeah, Anthem could maybe do it.
I mean, there has been talk about Dolby was working on, because the whole thing, they want it all on one chip, right? Like, that's the goal.
Right.
Is one cheap chip that they could just install and it does it. And there was talk that Dolby was working on a 9.2.4 chip. But given that Dolby seemingly could not care less about wide speakers, they were probably thinking more like a 7.2.6, you know, so you could have more overhead speakers type of thing.
Yeah.
But I haven't heard anything about that continuing development. It seems like they're like, you know what? Like every studio that is remixing for the home in Atmos, they've got an 11 speaker setup. They got 7.1, and then they've got 4 overhead speakers, top fronts, top rears. I'm like, I think we're done. I think we're done.
Honestly, I'm surprised people are putting up as many speakers as they are. Yeah. I know we're a subset. I know that we're a niche. I know that. I understand that. But still, I'm surprised that we're getting as many questions about it as we are. I kind of expected there to be a lot more, why would anybody do this stuff? So I feel like my microphone keeps falling down. I'm not really sure what's going on here. Tightening it.
There is a screw.
There is a screw. But anyways, and it's probably...
Yeah, honestly, my prediction is I would not hold my breath for 13 speakers simultaneous. Yeah.
Yeah, he has listened to our discussion of his subwoofer setup and has taken it all under advisement. Now, if I remember correctly, he had like subs up front, no, infinite baffle,
Infinite baffle in the back, subs up
sub
front
up
behind
front,
his screen, and
like
then two 10-inch subs in columns on the side walls.
Right. All right. Anyways, and we said that those two 10-inch subs were probably a bad idea. I think it's what we said, kind of.
Yeah.
Ish. Anyways, he does intend to co-locate two 18-inch subwoofers in the middle of his front wall, and then he will have two 18-inch drivers in an infinite baffle that has its opening in the middle of the back wall, but in the ceiling.
Yeah, that's fine. You got middle of the front wall, middle of the back wall. You're good.
Yeah, he already has the columns on the side walls where he was going to install a 10-inch driver on each side. But if the results aren't great, he'll just disconnect them.
So
right,
he's on board. He's saying he's cool with our advice, and he'll see how it goes.
There you go. All right. Anyways, he's also heard us loud and clear regarding his very high efficiency front speakers and how he ought to power them with an amplifier that has a very low noise floor. As we suggested, he's looking at ATI. But are there any options for finding a good deal on ATI amps? Well, the thing about ATI is that ATI OEMs for a lot of people.
Oh, yes, they do.
Emotiva does the same thing, to be honest with you. But when you buy it from Emotiva, you're getting pretty much the lowest price that's out there. Emotiva will make amps for other people, but when they, first of all, no one knows. It's not common knowledge that who they make amplifiers for. And when they do, you are paying a lot more for them. Now, they may be better amps.
Yeah, Bryston is a fairly obvious one. But...
Yeah, obviously Bryson. But yeah, and guess what? They're not making their own speakers either. Isn't it Bryson the one that's making
Axioms?
Those are Axiom speakers, right? Yeah.
Boy, are they ever.
Yeah, they are all of the Axioms. All the titanium tweeters in the whole world go to Axiom. Anyways, but ATI does make amps for a lot of the people. And the first one that comes to mind for me is the Outlaw Audio. Because they have been working with Outlaw Audio for pretty much ever.
From the beginning of Outlaw.
So if you're looking at Outlaw, you're looking at ATI. And if you look at the price, and you're like, well, why come this one's cheaper? Because it is. I don't know. Because of this.
Yep. Yeah, Outlaw is a great place to go. The other one is now Monoprice.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah, that Monolith 7 model, that Monoprice sells for $1,500, which is by no means cheap, but it is cheaper than any other ATI 7-channel, 200 watts per channel amplifier. Now, that Monolith 7 is a single-ended model, so it does not have XLR balanced inputs. Now, here's a little secret for you. If you're now looking at, like, a Marantz processor you were thinking, or Yamaha's like CX-A5100, because those are the mass market, high-end pre-pros that are out there, they aren't balanced anyway. They have XLR outputs, but inside, it's not like a balanced signal from end to end. All they did is they took what was a splendid signal, they divided it in two, they inverted one half, and they sent it out the XLR outputs. So other than if you have really long speaker, like wire runs from your processor to your amplifiers, and I'm talking like 300 feet plus, okay? And I don't think you have that.
No, not.
If you did, then yes, get XLR cables. But
he's talking about from the processor to the amp.
Yeah, from the processor to the amp, yeah. You know, you're going around a stadium, yes, get some balanced cables, because you will pick up home otherwise.
Just so happened to have 9 RCA cables that are 300 feet long, and I like to run them and just put them in a spool.
Just in a big coil.
A big coil
and
in the
then
corner.
I loop my power cords through the middle of those
I
coils.
actually use it to wrap around my surge protector.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. But otherwise,
I'm trying to create an electromagnet. Is really what I'm going for here.
Just get some RCA cables with some half-decent shielding, like from Blue Jeans Cable or, frankly, from Monoprice. And yeah, the rest you are fine. So, honestly, in these high-efficiency speakers, you can power them with a clock radio. I mean, I'd be fine with getting an AV receiver, like we're always talking about. And if you want external amplifiers, you know, I have zero problem with getting like the Monolith 7. I think it's going to be a great amp. I mean, it's essentially identical to the amp I have, which is the ATI 1807. It's essentially identical to that one. So yeah, that's your best deal. And then if you just want a good deal on an ATI branded ATI amplifier, there is Classic Audio Parts where they sell B stock. Now, they call it B stock and they sell it at a discount. It still comes with a 7-year manufacturer warranty.
Doesn't sound very
ATI,
B to me.
and there doesn't seem to be anything B stock about them. So really what it is that ATI, the brand, only sells through dealers, and this is their way of selling online direct to consumer without pissing off other dealers by calling it B stock.
That's right.
So, yeah.
All right, Brandon is looking to upgrade his front 3 speakers. He's got his eye on the SVS Prime series and maybe the Ultra series if budget allows. No, I haven't finished the review. Shut up. He's heard that I got a new computer and then the kid was sick. My kid was sick.
Oh, yeah.
Come on.
Which allowed you to get the new computer set up.
That is true. And the thermostat as well, which is making it very comfortable in the air. Let me just tell you, I'm usually sweating like crazy.
Yeah.
Very nice. Anyways, he's heard that all horizontal center speakers or designs are a compromise in some way. So would 3 matching bookshelves be the best option here? Sorry. I tried. I was two words away from the end of the sentence. I was like, I'm gonna make it. No, I didn't make it. My eyes are watering.
Wow, that was a powerful sneeze.
That was something. All right. So I'm not even gonna mute it on the audio. That's everybody's gonna get that. Anyways, it's some way that so would 3 matching bookshelves be the best option here rather than a dedicated center channel? Dude, let me be really super frank with you. You're not wrong. All right. And speaker manufacturers will tell you this. Speaker designers will tell you this. Center channels are a compromise. Okay. That is true. But if you put 3 identical speakers in the front of your room and they were all the same height, so which means that your TV is either really super high or it's blocking the bottom half of your TV.
Or you have an acoustically transparent screen.
Or you have
the only super good way of doing it.
Yeah. Chances are, as you did like pink noise, you're going to hear a timbre difference just because of placement in the room.
A little bit. Just a little bit.
There's gonna be a little bit. Okay. So yes, it would be technically better if you can make it work. It is recommended. Honestly, in actual use, very rarely, if ever, will you notice a timbre difference between a center channel, properly placed, properly oriented
center channel. Let's say that because there are bad center channels out there.
Yes, that matches the speakers that your main speakers that you bought. Rarely, if ever, are you going to notice a timbre difference there because of that. I mean, they're playing mostly different content anyhow.
Yeah, like what we're saying is, let's say you had a left bookshelf speaker, a right bookshelf speaker, and a center bookshelf speaker, identical, and then you also had a well-designed, horizontally oriented center speaker, and you just switched back and forth between the bookshelf center and the horizontal center, and you just switch back and forth between them. Right? Now, you might, if you're just A-B comparing them, hear a slight timbre difference, but you will also hear a timbre difference between the left bookshelf and the center bookshelf. That timbre difference will be about as large in difference as the left bookshelf versus the horizontal center. Like, there might be ever so slight differences if you're just strict A-B comparing them. You are correct. All horizontal center speakers are a slight compromise in some way. If nothing else, if they are wider than they are tall, they, by all accounts, should have slightly more edge diffraction at the high frequencies as they travel along that wider baffle and reach the edges of that wider speaker. So, okay, they're all a compromise in some way. That is correct information. But yeah, the end result is that no speaker placed in the middle of your room sounds identical to a speaker placed to the left or the right of your room.
That's right. So if he does buy 3 bookshelves and at some later time doesn't have the height clearance for the center bookshelf speaker, would turning it on its side ruin the timbre match and have a negative effect on the sound?
You can do that as long as the dispersion pattern supports it. You can do that all day long.
You can, but most, like, for example, Rob's speakers, if he were to do that, he would have to remove the tweeter,
rotate the tweeter,
and rotate it 90 degrees and put it back in.
Yeah.
Okay. Because of the dispersion pattern of the tweeter is such that it is designed to have, a certain width of its dispersion and a certain height, and that's maximized for what the tweeter can do. But when you turn it on its side, suddenly you have reoriented it in such a way that it was never meant to be, and therefore you would have to turn it. You would have to turn it in order to make sure it's still giving you the right dispersion pattern. And likely in that case, like if the height was the problem, think about this: if it didn't have a very good vertical dispersion that had really good side to side dispersion, and when you turn it on its side, suddenly it's got good vertical dispersion and terrible side to side. And guess what you really don't need is vertical dispersion. That's why it was like that in the first place. Not nearly to that stuff. So
if anybody is watching the video version of it, I'm showing and going back to Tom K's, that is theater, where he has Sierra 2 speakers which use the ribbon tweeters, same speakers that I have, that have narrow vertical dispersion but very wide horizontal dispersion. But he has 3 of them all lying on their sides, but with the tweeters rotated 90 degrees, so that even when the cabinet is lying horizontal, the speaker is still vertical up and down. So it still has wide horizontal dispersion, narrow vertical dispersion, like it should. You wouldn't want to have the tweeter in this case, rotated. But if it has even dispersion in both directions, like say a KEF Q series speaker with a coaxial tweeter and mid-range driver, then it really doesn't matter. I mean, in fact, they have center speakers that are nothing but the woofer with the tweeter right in the middle of it, and like, the speaker could be a cube, like the dispersion isn't going to change.
Sometimes are. So let's be honest.
Right. Yeah.
They sometimes are a cube.
So you can take that bookshelf speaker and you can turn it sideways, and if it has a waveguide or it has obviously different dispersion vertically than it does horizontally, you'll just have to rotate that tweeter 90
That's
degrees.
the same thing with the Veris Grand speakers. They have a waveguide, and you would have to talk to them. All in all, if you're gonna do this is fun. But I would talk to the speaker manufacturer before you start taking out tweeters and rotating them around.
And the other thing is if you're considering SVS speakers, either the Primes or the Ultras, both of those have really good center speaker designs.
Yeah.
So I would have no problem just saying, just get the center from the beginning, because it has a vertically aligned tweeter and mid-range driver, and then it just has some woofers on either side to augment the bass. You're essentially getting a bookshelf speaker with some bass woofers on either side of it, which works really well. So I'd say just get the center to begin with.
Yeah. All right. James is about to build a new theater. He already has a full ELAC debut speaker set, the F5 main, C5 center, B6s for the 4 surrounds, plus some other in-ceiling speaker for heights.
It's Atmos, man.
It is, and he's got a 7.2.4 system, and will have a 140-inch projection screen. I did not even get this far down these questions. All right,
okay.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
I wonder if that's a 2.35 to 1, because 140 inches isn't a normal 16 by 9 size.
Yeah, it's not, is it? It's not usually that. Well, anyways, for a 7.2.4 system, what would be the optimal room size those speakers can handle comfortably? Oh, those speakers, because he did tell us the speakers.
Yeah, he's got the speakers already.
Also, he can have up to 10-foot ceilings if that benefits the height speakers.
Okay, so I mean, I guess he's building this house from scratch to his design.
Well, yeah, it's a new theater room. So maybe it's an add-on to his house or something. I don't know. Maybe it's a man cave, like he's digging a hole.
Yeah, or he's designing a house from scratch. Who knows?
Who could be?
Anyway, it seems like dimensions are wide open here. So yeah, I pretty much looked at how loud can that C5 center, because to me the C5 center is like going to be the limiting factor if it's anything. It plays a lot of sound. The F5 towers can play louder than the C5 center can, and I'm not worried about the surrounds or the surround backs.
Right.
So I'm looking at that C5 center. It's about 87 dB efficient, with a little over 1 watt going into it because it's a 6 ohm nominal speaker, but about 1.2, 1.3 watts going into it. And then it can absorb 120 watts continuously. And then it can take like 2 to 3 times that power for a peak. So I'm like, okay, let's say I wanted to blast out 102 decibels continuously. Because that way I can double that power and get to 105 peaks for, full reference volume. And we're about this. So basically, that speaker's good up to about 12 feet away if you want to hit full reference volume. So your primary, I'm assuming he's going to go for 2 rows of seats.
Yeah,
I don't know that for a fact.
One would think.
Yeah. I would get with a 140-inch projection screen, be almost weird to not have 2 rows of seats. But basically, I would sit yourself 12 feet away from that screen because 140. If it's 140 inches, 16 by 9, that's actually quite nice from 12 feet away. It's pretty darn nice. A little over a 45-degree field of view. So that's pretty darn nice. So yeah, I'd say get that center speaker about 12 feet away from you, and then I'm like, okay, let's imagine this is acoustically transparent screen. So you want like at least 2.5 feet behind that screen.
Right,
I'm going to say there's 2 rows of seats, so we got 2.5 feet plus 12 feet to the front row, plus another 6 feet to the back row, plus another 3 feet to the actual back wall. And then we're going to have this 140-inch screen, and we're going to want about 2.5, 3 feet to either side of the screen. So I said, make your theater, if you can, I don't know if you can make a room this big, but here's what I consider the ideal dimensions for these speakers and this screen with a 12-foot viewing distance is a 16-foot wide theater that's 23 feet long and 9 feet high.
Sounds good. Do that.
None of those dimensions are evenly divisible by any of them. One of them's the golden ratio, and you'll be sitting 3/5 of the way into the theater, which is like great ratio-wise for that primary first row. And then if you go and sit in the second row, you have like a nice 32-degree field of view, which is perfect for watching HD TV. I'm like, it all works out, man. 16 feet wide, 23 feet long, 9 feet high. I don't know if you can make it that big. That's what I'm saying.
There you go. All right, Alan. We've discussed the test tones sent from receivers as 30 dB full scale, meaning when Odyssey is run, it will set the SPL level of the speakers to 75 dB.
Yes, because full scale in any of the individual speaker channels is 105
right,
dB.
105.
That's as loud as it ever gets.
Does that mean when watching a movie with this master volume on the receiver to 0 dB, it will be 75 dB average with peaks during explosions and other loud events at 105, with this being the volume? With this being the volumes the creators intended.
It depends on what they mixed.
Well, it always comes down to that. It always comes down to the mixing, because depending on what they put on that disc, it could be completely and totally different. And I know that we've all experienced this. We've all put in the disc and go, this disc is loud,
right?
And then we put in a different disc and go, this disc is soft. And then they put a third disc. You're like, this is the disc that most discs are like this one. Because I set normally when I'm watching Blu-rays, I set my volume at around -10 and -5, depending on who I'm trying to impress. Well, -15 and -5, depending on who I'm trying to impress. But sometimes I get a disc and I'm like, -30, I ain't touching it. That's as loud as this one's getting. And it's just sort of the way it goes.
So, I mean, to answer his question as directly as if they didn't change anything from the theatrical mix.
Yeah.
Let's say the home mix is essentially the same as the theatrical mix. Then, if you've done this, you went through Odyssey setup or you did it manually, the test tone's coming out at -30 dB full scale, meaning it should read 75 dB on your SPL meter, or according to Odyssey, you're hitting 75 dB at -30 dB full scale. If they did not change the cinema sound and they left it at reference volume, the average will now be at 85 dB in all speaker channels with peaks as loud as 105. That means you have set things to reference volume. Lots of home mixes on Blu-ray and DVD, they actually decrease the volume a little bit. The reference volume, the volume they intend you to listen at, they actually do decrease it for the home mix. But they still have 105 dB peaks. And sometimes they just decrease the average level because they're like, everyone tells us it's too darn loud when we leave it at 85 dB average. But yeah, people are getting confused by the numbers because we're saying 75 dB is what your SPL meter should read when the test tones are playing, but 85 dB average is full reference volume in a theater. And that is correct, but 85 dB is -20 dB full scale, and 75 dB is -30 dB full scale. There is no discrepancy going on. One of them is 10 decibels quieter in the signal than the other. The test tone is 10 decibels quieter than what should be the average in any given speaker channel. So that's why it's easiest to reference everything to full scale. That's what I'm going to do from now on.
All right. Also, as to the differences of C and Z weighting for SPL meters, he recalls we suggested use Z weighting when using Roomie Cube Wizard for measurements, while on another episode we explained REW needs to be calibrated to a standalone SPL meter because the REW has other things in the loop, such as the microphone, the computer, sound card, and all that that can affect the gain of the signal. In that case, when he calibrates Room EQ Wizard using his Radio Shack SPL meter, should he set the Radio Shack meter to Z weighting as well? He's always used C. Well, I know I was going to say, first of all, you can't, but because I've got one, I mean, I can show it to you. He's always used C weighting because that's what he's read you're supposed to do. Can we explain? Please explain again why and when to use C versus Z over A or whatever way. First of all, Radio Shack only has C and A. There is no Z. It doesn't exist. So, yeah. What he's describing, at least at the beginning here, is that when you first send the test tone out through Room EQ Wizard into your receiver, you turn your volume up to 0. Right, and then you can measure it with your SPL meter, and you should get a volume of 85, right? You should get 85 if you're going through.
If it's a negative 20 dB full scale coming off of like Avia or something like that, or if you're just using the internal test tone.
If you're using the internal test tones of the thing,
it should be 75.
It should be 75
on the SPL meter.
But if you're using a source separate, then you need to know, and there's a volume control on that source. Like if you're using your computer as the output, right? You need to make sure that the output that's going through that is giving you the right volume. So I think that's what he's saying here. I think that's what he's asking.
Yeah, I mean, so let's say you're sending. Let's just use the internal test tones of the AV receiver because that takes the source out of the picture. So you turned up the master volume dial to 0 dB because some AV receivers don't do what they all should, which is disregard where the master volume is set, but some of them do. So you turn up the master volume to 0 dB, and you play the internal test tone out of one speaker, and you put your Radio Shack handheld SPL meter. You put that on a tripod, and you put that pointing straight up at the ceiling, approximately in your primary seat, and you use binoculars to look at it so that your body doesn't. I'm kidding, but you look at the reading.
He's not kidding. This is what he really does. Don't lie to you.
And that SPL meter, the Radio Shack SPL meter, should be set to C weighting because the only two options on the Radio Shack SPL meter are C weighting or A weighting. And A weighting is really only linear from about 500 hertz to 5,000 hertz, and it drops off, like the microphone response drops off above 5,000 hertz and below 500 hertz. So down in the deep bass, it's pretty much ignoring that sound. The microphone's like ignoring that sound, and above 5,000 hertz, it's ignoring a lot of sound. So we want more sound coming into the microphone than that. We don't want it ignoring all that sound. So we set it to C weighting, which is fairly linear from about 80 hertz up to about 8,000 hertz, which is a lot better. That's certainly getting a way more bass than A weighting. So we set the Radio Shack SPL meter to C weighting, play the internal test tone with the master volume set to 0 dB, and we adjust that test tone on the AV receiver until the Radio Shack SPL meter in C weighting shows 75 dB on the needle, or if you have the digital one, on the little digital readout. Now we connect our hopefully bought from Cross Spectrum Labs calibrated microphone connected to Room EQ Wizard running on a computer, and we tell it to measure the SPL. And it says 82 or 83 or something or other. And in this instance, since we want to compare like to like, we do want to set it to C weighting at this moment. At this moment, we want the Radio Shack SPL meter is C weighted because that's the best option. And we also want Room EQ Wizard set to C weighting at this moment because we want apples to apples. And now we can adjust the internal trim in Room EQ Wizard to say, well, if it's reading 82 every time, the Radio Shack SPL meter reads 75, and then we turn it up a couple dB, the Radio Shack SPL reader now reads 77, and now the Room EQ Wizard is showing 84. We go, okay, there's just a simple offset going here. It's just 7 decibels off due to the sound card, your microphone preamp, whatever's going on. And so we just trim that down inside of Room EQ Wizard. Everything's set to C weighting right now. And now both the Radio Shack SPL meter and Room EQ Wizard are showing you 75 dB. And now Room EQ Wizard is calibrated. Now we can go ahead and set it to Z weighting. Z weighting is no weighting. All audible frequencies come in and it just accepts them all with no curve or anything at all, no filter whatsoever. And now we can do very, very accurate measurements using Room EQ Wizard and our calibrated microphone in Z weighting now.
In the Room EQ Wizard 2, you also have to load up the calibration file that was provided to you by Cross Spectrum Labs.
Yeah.
There is a way of using Room EQ Wizard with your Radio Shack meter by plugging it directly into your computer, in which case you would set it to C, and there's a calibration file that's already included with Room EQ Wizard that you could use that with. It's going to be a gross calibration file,
it's far more coarse than what Cross Spectrum Labs could give you.
That's right, because that is for the known deficiencies within all of these things, not your specific one. So it's not quite as good, and obviously, and plus the microphone in that is not nearly going to be as good as the one that Cross Spectrum Labs is.
And it's responding terribly accurately below 80 hertz and above 8,000 hertz, regardless. I mean, part of that calibration file for the Radio Shack SPL meter that's built into Room EQ Wizard is to try and compensate for the C weighting that is part of that Radio Shack SPL meter, but it can only do so much. You know, when the microphone itself is not responding accurately to begin with, it's hard to compensate for that really well. So it does its best, and honestly, it's not that bad. It's not
better than
horrible.
the with a sharp stick. It's better than nothing.
Absolutely,
certainly better than nothing. So there you go. All right. Well, this is where the end of the podcast now. I think we've talked long enough.
For sure.
Rob certainly has. I'm glad that you prepared, Rob. I'm sorry that I wasn't as prepared as I usually am. I usually say I'm not that prepared, but I'm usually more prepared than I promised. But today was not. I really was. For like the hour beforehand, I was sitting in here. I was supposed to be doing whatever, but I didn't. I just had I had to install, like I was trying to make sure, because remember last time when we used my outboard sound preamp with my Mac, I couldn't get a picture out of it. So I was like terrified we were going to be back in that situation. So I was doing the stuff. But everything worked fine. Technology is on the way. I'll be more on board and more on the ball next week. If you'd like to get your question answered by Rob and maybe even me, email us at question@avrant.com. You can email Rob directly at rob@avrant.com and CC me just for the heck of it at tom@avrant.com. You can go to www.avrant.com where you can leave us a donation and leave us a comment. Donation, you can click up at the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. Let me see here. I'm going to scroll up to the top. I keep double clicking on the next.
Well, you do. I'll mention Jonathan F. did send in another question this week. And
it's not a question. It's many questions.
Multiple choice. But yeah, Jonathan, we will address your concerns on next week's show.
I want to thank Deepon and Brandon, our listeners of the week, for their donations, and Nelson for talking us up to accessories for less than SVS.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. We very much appreciate it.
Yes. You go to facebook.com/AVRant podcast, ask your question there, post it there, see if you get an answer before the podcast. But we will also talk about it on the podcast. That's the way this works. All questions asked are answered. So ask away. Facebook, no, you said that. Twitter, at First Reflect for Rob, at AVRant_Tom for me, and at Austin Pond for Austin. He's our producer who also has his own podcast, We Watch Movies. It is a podcast about nylons. Not like stockings. No, stockings. Nylon. Like the material and uses for it.
Okay. Like
yeah, like he tests this thing right here. This is like a little nylon thing. Yeah, that's I got that from him.
Dielectric?
Yeah. Dielectric.
There are many uses for nylon. Yes.
It's a very, very boring podcast. I'm sorry to say. They just talk about nylon constantly. They're very excited about it. I do appreciate that.
He gets more than 25% over there because it's his podcast.
That is true. But again, 25% of squat is still squat. There you go.
It's a higher percentage.
I don't know. You know what? I think if somebody actually did I bet DuPont or somebody would probably fund you. I would think that would be a marketable thing. I would think so. You should look into that. Austin, you should look into that. All right. Until next week, for AV Rant, I'm Tom Hendrick.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.